Today are scary.
Nah, not all of them, just most of them. Anyway, welcome everybody back to the fourth semester. I'm just going to go over a little bit about what we're going to go over this semester. We already kind of talked about this last semester, but just a brief overview of what we're doing. This semester, we're going to be talking about editing, which is going to be like some of the technical stuff, some of the basics to start out with. Like if you're starting editing, we're going to be talking about that kind of stuff. And how to edit for stories. So we're going to be looking at some of the more subjective things about editing, but also the technical aspects, so we can kind of get an overview of all of it at once. We're going to be talking about equipment, which is going to be like different brands of the different pieces of equipment, the different types of equipment that are out there, and different things that you should be looking out for when buying certain things. Also, just hopefully going over like a general overview of most of the equipment used on film sets, whether they're smaller. Mostly like independent ones. The larger sets have a lot more heavy duty equipment that isn't as easily researchable. So that stuff's not going to be as much in it, but I do have some stuff in the syllabus for it. And then we're going to be looking at budgeting and financing and like how to budget, where to find funds, websites that you can use, crowdfunding, maybe, why and why not, those kinds of things. And then like how much movies cost in general and why, and when you actually break it down and look at each thing and why it costs that much and start understanding how much money you're going to need for your kind of project. So those are the things we're looking at for this semester. What was that?
And that's helpful too, like when you have an idea of like, yeah, that just makes sense. And then the different scale too. So
yeah, a bunch of different.
Each department's gonna have like a need to have a budget, and then depending on the sizing of your movie, it's gonna be different budget for each department. Yeah,
right. And even if you're in a department, you will have a budget that you have to go by, especially the bigger you on the bigger sets, especially the person making the overall budget isn't going to be looking at each detail of everyone's budget. That's going to be handed off to different people, then handed off to different people. And then everyone's going to kind of overview each other to make sure that they're staying within those budgets. But it would be like the DP on a film will get a budget saying, hey, this is how much the camera department has to spend. And this is how much the lighting department has. Figure it out. And then they figure out where the funds should be going. Give the lighting budget over to the gaffer, and then they figure out what they need, what they can get with the money that is provided, and start making requests for if they need to get more budget, if that's not going to work for what you guys want, or speaking to the director or producer saying, hey, you guys wanted this, but the budget you're giving me, so everybody kind of has a say in the budget and needs to kind of know those things, especially in their department. So budget goes all through any job you're going to get, really.
Could you elaborate a little bit on the stuff that wasn't researchable?
So there's some new stuff that's going on in film that I'm going to put into the sixth semester, but it was, some of the stuff like the virtual sets, kind of like how the Mandalorian's doing it. It's pretty new, so there's not very much information on it. And the information that is out there is basically just towards a certain, just basically for behind the scenes of Mandalorian, or, one other projects that's done it, things like that. Or it's like those big giant pieces of equipment for different cranes and the $1 million pieces of equipment that aren't easily accessible or found. They're not really explained, because by the time you get to the point of being able to afford them, you should already pretty much know what they are. And so those brands and those things, they're not really easy to research and find out, because they're not expecting the masses to just start buying these things that are robotic arms that match the timing of everything and all these other things that big studios use.
No, I understand, and it's very specific and pointed, and I've seen a lot of these big equipment, so I don't know the names or like the specifics on it, but I've seen some of those really, and I get and why, because it's like it's more like if you're breaking down a shot, and you're like you said, you're already going to be at the point there if you're the one deciding on the equipment all the other equipment, and you're like, oh, we have all this regular equipment, but for this specific shot that we're doing, we need a specific piece of extra equipment to order in for this
Right.
shot or scene or a couple shots or whatever it is, right?
Yeah,
Or-
because it starts to
or-
get
or-
very specified. It starts to get very like, this can be used in this specific instance, but it's not good for these other instances, which is why it's not really adopted by the masses. Not just
No, but
because it's
unless-
expensive, but because it's hard to understand. And until you have a grasp of that type of stuff, you won't really know
Yeah.
how to work it or what any of it means anyway, which is why
Yeah,
it's not
exactly,
really easy to research.
No, and that makes sense. That's for any like industry.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense. It's just this industry happens to be like a really big scale film movie because it's huge. But other industries as well. Like if you have like a fancy like car dealership, you have all of the basic stuff, but only the people like as you have to learn all that other stuff before you get to understand like the harder stuff. That's on a
Yeah,
smaller
you have to
scale,
know
like,
like
that's on a smaller
what
scale.
this thing, why is it good anyway? Because like before you start using that stuff, or before you start getting invested into learning about cinematography, for example, you might not
Yeah.
understand why they need a robot arm to precisely time the movement of the camera. And it's because they're doing some giant visual effects CGI shot that needs to track everything in the background while also doing the focus pulling at the right point. And so
Yeah.
it needs to be a lot auto because a person can't really handle all that at once.
No, and
But like smaller budget, like when you're first starting out, you're not really thinking about all that. So you're not really like
no.
thinking
So when
about
you first-
why is that? It's cool, it looks good, but like, do they really need that? And
Yeah,
it's
it's
like
like
maybe they don't need it, but it does help a lot in post-production or just for production to get it done quickly, because timing is very much part of the budget as well.
Yeah, and then starting to think about like all of the high-end equipment and things like that, because like when you start having budget, it's like, oh, we spend a little bit more here to save on the back end, or
Right.
It's like more money for the day, but we can take that shot that might have taken, like, say whatever, I don't have a good example for it, but maybe the shot would take 2 days to shoot. We don't have 2 days, but if we spend a little more money on this a piece of equipment to get it, it'll help the shoot get done in 1 day, maybe with like an hour of OT, and then this saves them a day of production. And it's just like there's a whole bunch of different levels and things to start thinking about as well. Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, those are my thoughts.
No, definitely. I agree with everything, because like once you get to those bigger budget productions, there's so many people on set that sometimes it's cheaper in the long run to rent out a piece of equipment that's a lot more money. Or, the big studios, sometimes they own a bunch of their own equipment, so they just already have it. It's worth
Yeah.
it because they're making films so often
Mhm.
that like Sarah said, if it's going to take an extra day, well, that's however much you're paying those people per day, everybody at once. If you factor all that money in, it might just be cheaper to get the other thing. And to
Yeah,
go
it might
with
be
the
cheaper
other
to
option.
pay 20 grand for the extra piece of equipment instead of 100 grand for the day.
Exactly.
Then when you're coming down, you just save 80 grand. That's not peanuts. Like,
But yeah,
So
for
there's a lot of
us,
configuration,
for
yeah.
equipment and the stuff I've put in, it's a lot
Another
of
thing, as far as like financing, another thing that I've heard a lot is, try to do math in the sense of like how much it would cost you for your overall production, and not just per day, not just per hour, because sometimes per day, per hour, it can seem like not that much, but when you go and calculate it through the overall time of production, it's a lot. And
Yes.
that was kind of like a tip with everything, basically, that I was like, I'm taking that for everything. But especially for that, because sometimes you're like, oh, it's just this much an hour, this much a day or whatever. And then like, yeah, for 2 weeks or for 2 months, like it adds up.
It does.
Yeah.
So, like, you have to be very pointed and specific in like there's so many things. And then on like huge productions, they're like, I've also seen like things go wrong or heard things go wrong. I won't talk about it, but like that does happen too. So those are things. And then there's other productions that are very tight, but everything runs super smoothly. And they're usually more like in the medium sized budget. I've noticed that. But they're less risk taking, if that makes any sense, because it fits into that like zone, if that makes any sense. Like
yeah, because they don't have room to take those risks. They don't have the
Yeah.
they
So
don't
there's
have
less.
the
Like on the big
ability
shows.
to, because they don't have the funding for it. So they have
And
to
then,
be
yeah,
a little more tight. And then the lower budget you get, the more you have to get exact
everything, yeah,
shots, and the more you can't like experiment here and there because you don't have time. Time becomes a
money.
huge factor
Yeah, it's
in
true.
budgeting and in just getting it done. But also for larger budget productions, they have a more strict date because
Yes.
they're like, they're Marvel movies. They have like a 4-year plan or whatever it is right now where they're saying what is coming out when. And whenever it starts going into actual pre-production, you got to have it done by that point. Otherwise, that throws off their whole schedule and that doesn't look good for the studio and all these other things. So when you get the
Yeah.
higher budget production, it also is very timed and very scheduled out to where it's like, I don't care if you need 5 weeks for this, you only have 4, so you better get it done. And that's when all that overtime and hiring extra people come in.
Yeah, it's a different ball game, and I find that each one has its pros and cons. So it's just like, what do you prefer working on? It's like, well, everything has its pros and cons, because on the smaller stuff, you have to be very precise and pointed. Sure, you don't get to experiment as much, but you really get to smooth out and like take, you know what I mean? Like
You get to take your time in post-production if you need to, and all these other things, because you don't really have a set date. You should set a date for yourself because it gets you to get it done, but you shouldn't you don't have to stay so strict as a huge production studio would.
Yeah, like on a huge production studio, it's a different, and then those medium too, right? So like on huge production studios, there's different levels as well. And then you've got micro budget sets, you've got like Hallmark non-union sets, you've got other, and then you have the different levels of union as well. So then you've got like a medium class union show where they don't take as many risks versus like a huge production union show that takes a ton of risks and things go wrong and things this, and it's super fun and crazy. So it really is dependent. So
yeah,
I don't know.
For us, for the equipment, I'll just say that I put in as much as I could think of. I will be adding to this syllabus as I did with last semester, because there's already some things in editing that I've come across that I was like, crap, I forgot to add that in. So I'll be adding those in, and I'll send it out once everything is updated, but I'll be continuously updating it as I come across more information that I would like to learn more about and that I think would be good to talk about.
Brilliant.
But those are the things that we're doing, and this semester is going to be about. One of the things that I put in is I was looking into like what the different brands are, some of the main brands that are used for different pieces of equipment, like cameras, lenses, things like that, so that you just have a general idea if you're out looking for something.
You start to the names.
And like I said, that's not going to include the highest budget stuff, because that's not really there's not really much information on it, because it's either so expensive or it's so niche that it's just whoever knows about it, and the other ones who don't, they don't care, because they're not trying to get everyone to get it. It's for like the higher tier stuff anyway. So that kind of like, some camera types, I'm sure I didn't put them in there because I don't even know what brands they use on those kinds of productions sometimes, I'm sure. Things like that.
Yeah.
But anyway.
That's fine.
You don't have any questions oh, sorry, go ahead.
That makes sense. You wouldn't even really, that would be something like you'd break down per shoot, and they wouldn't even necessarily say you have a big production company, they may not even use the same equipment, and they'd have to probably do like on certain pieces of equipment, it's like they have to learn for that show, if that makes any sense. Sure, they're great at all. Sometimes that'll happen too, right? So if you're really good if you're a camera operator and you're really good with those equipment, occasionally you'll have to learn a new piece of equipment.
Yeah.
That goes, for a specific shot and other things. It's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. It's always something new to learn, which is one of the reasons I love it. But does anyone else have any questions or comments about anything so far? Or just about the syllabus, I guess, in general? All right, cool. So let me actually go back up. Oh, there we go. Anyway, so what we're talking about today is just kind of like an editing, the sequence of editing or the editing workflow, how like the stages in editing. And this will differ. I was looking really hard into it, asking a bunch of people, asking different like groups for filmmaking on Facebook and Reddit. And basically like I got a general sense of what happens, but also it's just like it depends on the production. It depends on how many people are in the editing, how high the budget is. So these will vary depending on the set and depending on what kind of movie it is. If it's a very visual effects heavy movie like the Avengers, or even a lower budget thing that's very visual effects heavy, then the visual effects artist will probably be there from the beginning, even in pre-production, to help map everything out. But if it's something that has like an explosion here and the rest of the film is live action stuff that doesn't need visual effects as much, then the visual effects artist might just come in later. So just prefacing that it's going to be different depending on what the set is. Even all the videos I watched, every single one had sort of a different flow. They all have generally the same, but some of this stuff is also not linear, which I'll be talking about as well. So the first thing that you're going to do when starting editing is you're going to offload the footage and you're going to back up the media in case anything goes wrong. This is going to either be done by like a data wrangler or a DIT if you don't have a data wrangler, or by you if you don't have either of those on your set. But they'll be taking the footage and backing it up to different hard drives, different computers and stuff like that, just to make sure that if anything goes wrong in any process of this whole thing, you still have your original source footage so that you don't lose everything, because that is the worst thing that can happen. And they do it daily. It's called the dailies. That way that if something does go wrong, all you lost was 1 day's amount of work. They don't wait until the end of the whole thing and then offload it all at once. That would be too much and too scary to do. Does anyone have any questions or comments about that part?
I don't think so.
Also, if I'm getting anything wrong, please speak up and let me know, because I trying to be as
we're
correct as
learning this
possible. I
with
don't
you
like giving out
guys.
wrong information, but I'm just trying to be as close to what it would be as possible. And I have a few other things I want to go over as well, but just letting everyone know that. All right.
And
So
we're
the next
also
thing you would
learning this
do,
all with-
what was that?
and we're also learning this with you guys too. So of course, while we learn more and while we research more, I'm sure we're gonna come across some stuff and like either correct or, oh, this was also another way that we learned, or
Yeah. So, I mean, I already had a general sense of how this goes, but there's these things that happen that I wanted to like really learn each step of the process. And I've learned a lot, but I still feel like there's probably a lot that I'm not having in here. Just letting you guys know. But the next step would be organizing the media, putting it into different bins and making sure that it's all organized correctly. It's easily accessible, easy to find. Adding metadata, like different things about the footage or the audio. Like for the footage, for instance, you might put what kind of lens was used, or you might put what kind of frame rate it was at. That way, I mean, some of this stuff's already in the file whenever you upload it to your computer, but a lot of other stuff can be added. That way, if anything gets lost during this whole process, you can just look up some of the stuff and find it on your computer. And it's also so that everyone is clear about what that is, that file, and what it's going to do. Because usually, especially like I said, once you get to the higher budget stuff, especially, or just like you start getting more and more people in post-production, it's going to be a lot of handing off and sharing footage and sharing files. And so it starts to get really confusing if people don't know exactly what is what. So that's why keeping everything as clear as possible, even if it's just you, if you're the only one editing it, keeping it as clear as possible is going to be the easiest thing for you to do for yourself, because it might take some time up front, but later on, if you need to find something and you have it all organized, it'll be a lot easier than trying to look through everything to see where that one missing piece of information is, or where that clip went to that you were wanting to add in that you forgot to. So organize it all, name it all, add some data to it to let it add some metadata to the file so that you know exactly what it is. And if you need to look into it, you can see exactly what was used in case you need to use that same lens, or for whatever reason, if you have to redo that shot, you know what was done with it. If you need to do a pickup later on, things like that. So organizing and all that is very helpful. Then you would do, the editor would sync the audio and the video sources together. There's a few different ways that this can be done. This can be done either manually, it can be done automatically. Oh, whoops. Automatically, you would have to record audio to your camera, and some editing softwares, a lot of them are starting to have it, but I know Adobe Premiere Pro is at least one of them, that if you put in a camera's footage and you had some kind of audio source, whether you're recording audio to your camera or you had an external mic plugged directly into your camera, it will have an audio track, and then you can have your real audio track that you recorded separately on the field recorder. And you can tell the Premiere Pro to basically merge the two so that it finds the points where it's exactly the same and lines it up, syncs it. And then you just mute the camera audio, and that way you have automatic syncing. You don't have to like worry about it being unsynced or being out of sync, because that can be distracting, especially to your audience, and you never want that to happen. So that is one way you can do it. Another way, if you didn't record audio, if your camera doesn't record audio to itself and you didn't plug in an external mic to it, you can also do manually. That is why you see those slates being used, the clapper boards. Those are used so that there is a point in the footage where there's a loud smack. And then you can find that in the waveform, and you can see that whenever the sticks hit each other. And you just line up the audio from where that point is to where the sticks hit in the audio, and then just watch it to make sure everything's lined up. And then you do that with each piece of footage. You just manually look at each one and do that and line it up. There's a little bit of error in this sometimes because, you might not be the exact frame. So you always want to be paying special attention to trying to get as close as you can. Individual frames you want to be looking at and seeing when those sticks finally hit each other to make that noise. That way you can get the closest to the sync as you can if you're doing it manually. And then the third way is using what's called a time code generator, which generates noise and these, I'm not exactly sure the specifics of how exactly it works. We'll learn about that more this semester. But basically what it does is it allows the camera and the sound files to know, the video files and the sound files to match up, because they know exactly when they were made, and it has like a specific code for each file. So every time you start a new file, it creates a specific code that the audio file and the video file have that all the other ones don't. That way they can find each other, they can match each other. And you usually need like a different kind of software to be able to merge these clips and sync them later in post. But it definitely helps to keep everything exactly in sync. That's one of the main ways to do it if you're trying to get it exact, because that will give it a specific time code that has exactly where those clips line up. So that is the one that's used by big Hollywood films and stuff like that. And it's not that expensive. Like, we'll talk about it more later, but it looked like a few of them were just, depending on like what you're trying to get, like it's probably about a few $100 to $1,000 for one of the cheaper ones. And that way you have it and you can use it in all of your things. Or you could just rent it out, or you could have somebody like we did that already had it and used it on our set. So it really will help. It like in ours though, it does seem to add it is a bit of a learning curve to figure out how to get it to work in post if you've never done it before. Something I've never used it before, and we're using it on our previous short film that we shot. And it seems like there's a few things that it has a few things that are hard to like figure out why it's not connecting, why it's not syncing. And one of the problems is that it needs to have the original source files. We'll talk about this more later as well, but I also forgot to mention this. When you're organizing your media, another thing you need to do is once you're going to put it into that editing system, you don't mess with it anymore. You don't rename it. You don't move it anywhere on your computer. And that's because when you're editing, it creates a project file, which basically just points to where those source files are. It points to where that video file is. It points to where that sound file is. So if you move it or if you rename it, the computer can't find it anymore, and that messes it up. So that's why you need to be sure to organize first, make sure it's all good, and then start moving it into your project, your editing software, because otherwise you might move it somewhere or you might rename it later on, and then it causes some problems because then you have to go back and find that footage so that so that the editing software knows where it can be found. All right. So after the editor's done syncing the audio and the video, they'll start scrubbing through the footage, especially with like longer form footage and content like films. You're going to have a lot of different takes that you might be able to use. And so the editor will go through, they'll scrub through. And what that means is they just kind of they click on it, and they just quickly look through it at high speeds. If you've ever used an editor, you'll know what I'm talking about. Or if you've ever watched YouTube and just grabbed that little thing at the bottom, the little thing that shows how long the video has been playing, and you just drag it and it starts playing it super fast. It's kind of the same process. You just scrub through it so that you can see. Scrub through it. You scrub through it so you can see what's happening in it. And if you like the take or not, and the editor will go through and see like what their favorite takes are. They'll mark that. They'll also be looking at those different forms that you used in production, like the camera reports, sound reports, things like that, so that they can see, oh, I don't even need to really look at this one unless I absolutely can't use anything else, then I'll take a look at it. But if they say there's a sound problem with this file, there's no need for me to look through it and hear it because they say there's a problem with it. So I'll just wait and try to use one of the other takes. Same thing with the camera and all those other things. They'll just look through everybody's notes and find the footage that they need to look through, and then they'll scrub through it, see what they like, and then they'll start what's called a rough cut. Those would be the first cut of everything being put together. And again, might be a little different depending on the production. They might do it in chunks. They might do it by scene instead of the whole thing at once. Lower budget stuff, usually you'll start doing the whole thing at once because you don't really have that workflow where you're passing off things to the editor every day. But it just depends really on how you've set it up. But on bigger budget productions, they kind of everybody's starting to work at once. So usually they'll be working in chunks, and they'll do it like scene by scene pretty much. Or they'll do one scene until the director likes it, and then okay, pass that scene off, and then they the next person works on it, and so on and so forth until they go through the whole film, and then they start putting it all together to see what it looks like. And that's when you have those scenes that get deleted, and you have those deleted scenes in the bonus features, because those scenes didn't work with the whole movie, they just worked by themselves or something like that. So they'll make a rough cut, putting that film together. The director will give them feedback on what they like and what they don't like. Producer might watch it. A few different people might check it out and give notes. And then they'll take those notes, they'll re-edit it, and they'll change some things, and they'll make a second cut and a third cut, and so on and so forth until they finally get it to a point where the director signs off on it saying, yeah, this is good. And, of course, depending on how high the budget is, if it's a studio project, the producer and some other people will have to sign off on it as well. But a lower budget project, like an indie film, usually it's just like the director that can say, yeah, I like it. Maybe the director and the producer. And then once those people say yes, they sign off on it. You start what is called, oh, whoops, I forgot. You also, the editor, once they have everything in place and they like it, they'll probably, depending on what is in the film, what's in the project, whatever they're working on, they'll put in these temporary placeholder files. Something like if there's supposed to be a title there, they'll just put, a title here or some kind of note. If there's a visual effects scene or shot, they'll just put something like, let's say the camera is supposed to look up and they see a spaceship flying overhead. Then there might just be this black, like on this picture, might just be black and say spaceship flies overhead for a few seconds, however long that little clip is supposed to last. And they'll have these placeholder things. They might put some placeholder sound, placeholder visual effects. If it's something like an explosion or something kind of easy to just grab like a version off of online. It's like, this isn't the final, it's just showing everybody what it's kind of going to look like. And then the sound effects so everybody can kind of hear what they're going for. And they might get placeholder music as well, just to say like, this is the kind of music we're going for. That way, if you are working with a bunch of people, if there are a bunch of teams, the visual effects teams can kind of hear what that music is going to be like and what that sound effect is going to be like during that part. So while they're making the visual effects, they kind of have a better understanding of what they're going for. Sound department, they'll see the visual effect and be like, oh, okay, so they're going for like that kind of explosion. It won't be exactly it won't look exactly like it's going to in the final because the visual effects artist hasn't made it yet, but it will be a close enough representation to where it'll give everyone a general idea so that they have a better understanding of what they want, what kind of explosion sound to make, how big is that explosion. Things like that will be placeholders so that those sound guys can start working on it and then go back and maybe edit and adjust it later if necessary. But then they get a better understanding. Because if it's a car exploding or if it's just a small little grenade, it's going to sound different. So they need to kind of get a sense of what the director is going for. And that's why those placeholders will be put in. With visual effects and with CGI heavy stuff. Oh yeah, go ahead, Raphael, you're raising your hand.
I'm sorry, I just really wanted to add something. Like if you're working on anything creative, like please for the love of God save your like stuff before you like finish, because I've been losing data. Like yesterday I was working on this pixel thing and the power went out and I lost my data. So please save your stuff.
Man. Yeah, save very often, I agree. Yeah, that really
a lot of softwares even allow you to like set up an auto save thing where it just automatically saves every, I don't know, 20 minutes or whatever you want.
Yeah, that's good
Yeah,
too.
but not everything does.
True.
But yeah, that is a good point. Definitely want to be sure you're saving constantly because anything you're adding to it, especially because if you're doing lower budget stuff or if you have like not the best computer, the more stuff you're adding to it, the more you're changing things around and adding effects and all these other things, whatever you're doing to that footage, it's going to start putting more of a toll on that computer, that piece of equipment that you're working on. And that could also make it crash. I've had it in the past. I had like a really bad computer and I was trying to do my YouTube video stuff on it. And it was bad to where the point where if I added a title in before saving, it would just crash and then everything would be gone. Just like Raphael said. So it's always good to save over and over again. If you've ever played video games and you know, like whenever you're getting ready to go to a new spot, save before you go in because you don't know what's in there. Same thing with video editing. You don't know what's going to cause problems or you don't know, if something like power going out is going to happen. So you just want to save over and over. Even if it's auto saving, I would still make it a habit to try to save as much as you can. Oh yeah, that's also true. Mel said sometimes you can make copies of the project file before you make any significant changes as well. That way, if something's not working or if it doesn't work like for what you like, or if it doesn't work as in it's causing an actual error, then you can just go back to the original and not have any problems. And I agree with that completely. Always keep different copies because it's not going to take up that much room. Project files aren't really that big because they're not actually that source video and audio file. They're just pointing to it saying, hey, here's where it's found. they're not that big, so you can actually keep multiple copies of it.
Yeah, mainly it's the render files that take up a lot of space within the project.
Mhm. Let me see, what was it doing? Oh, I was saying, for if you have like a visual effects scene, or a sequence of visual effects stuff or CGI stuff, then usually you'll put either like, it could be the storyboard, a few panels of the storyboard in, kind of timed out, spaced out to show like how long that scene might be, or it might be the animatic, which is like a crappy animation to show just kind of how it's going to go down. That way there's the timing, there's the movement, and that helps everybody as well. So it's not just those placeholders of titles and things like that. There's also placeholders like using things from production to help visualize what's going to be happening whenever you don't have that footage, because the visual effects department or artist or yourself, if you're doing it, need to work on that later. So you just get that to show how it's going to kind of look for the end product. That way, when you're watching it from front to back, from the beginning to end, you can see kind of how it would be with that visual effects scene in there and be like, is it even necessary? So one of the main things that everybody was saying was, you got to make sure once you're getting ready to put visual effects in, that you're done with the footage. That is actually the next thing. Yeah. Something called picture locked, or locking the picture. That means that you're not going to mess with the picture. You're not going to adjust the footage around anymore. It's at a point that you like it enough where you're going to say, I'm not touching it anymore. And that's going to help with everything else. Whether you're doing everything yourself or whether you're passing it off to other people, you need to picture lock it to say, I'm not messing around with this anymore, because you don't want your visual effects, your sound, your music to start working on things, or if you're doing it yourself, you don't want to work on those things and then realize, oh, you know what? This clip isn't working the way I thought it was going to, so I'm just going to kick it out, because that's a lot of work that just went down the drain from you, from visual effects, from sound, and the music, the composer. So picture lock it first, make sure it all works in sequence. Of course, there might be some things you change around at the very end when you see the final product. But up until that point, you want to say, I'm not touching the picture until I see it all together and see if it's all working properly, because you'll have a better idea of it. Generally speaking, you won't really mess around with too much of it, hopefully, by the time you're done, after you block the picture. So another thing that happens, and this happens on the larger sets that I heard of, which I haven't really heard of like other people talking about it, is what's called a spotting session. And that's usually done by like the director, the producer, post-production supervisor, composer, sound designer, or the sound mixer. And they just watch it and kind of see where sound effects need to go. Is Foley going to do that? Are we recording new sound for that location, like on location? Are we going out and recording sounds? Are we creating them digitally with sound design, or are we needing to do Foley? And where do those sounds need to go? Also, pieces of music. Does music need to underlay the entire scene? Does it need to go in a specific moment? When does it need to start? When does it need to end? And ADR, is there any sound, is there any of the dialogue that's not working? Is there any ADR that needs to be added because the story is not really working? So you need to add in a cutaway to character B so that character A can say something that fills in a hole that you missed on set. That actually happens quite a lot, actually, where they add in different lines that weren't originally in the script, because it just helps the viewer understand the story a bit more, or understand what's going on. Or, oh, why did they get mad all of a sudden? Oh crap, we're kind of missing this part. Well, if we cut to character B and then have a line that says, well, screw you, That's why character B starts getting a little offended, and now it makes more sense. Or they just see like where the audio isn't working, like that audio doesn't sound the best, something's wrong with that, or I don't like that the way they're saying that. Then they'll say we need ADR here, right? Automated dialogue replacement, so that the actors can come back and record those lines of dialogue, and they can place them in where that footage is.
What was the percentage? I forgot. What was the percentage that they said of like footage that doesn't get used? I thought that was so.
Oh yeah, on a big movie. That's somewhere in my notes. Let me check. On a large.
That just blew
movie.
my mind. I was like, holy crap, yeah.
Yeah, because it's actually quite a lot that isn't even used on those bigger budget films. I think a lot of it is the fact that it's just, retakes and different takes on it. But a lot of it's also just like, oh, here we go. Films have a lot of footage, way more than is needed for the final product. Hollywood movies, like some Hollywood dramas, they shoot basically like a 1:20 ratio, which means that for every 20 minutes that they shoot, one of those minutes is going to be used. So in a 120-minute film, it's about 38 hours of unused footage. And I mean, like I said, much of that can probably be different takes, unusable clips, things like that. But there's also many like different parts within a scene, or many scenes and extra parts that get taken out after shooting as well. Those big budget movies, they shoot tons of extra stuff, and then they end up not needing a majority of it, and they condense it down to that little 2.5-hour movie, which is also something that's very different from independent films and smaller budget films to the higher budget films. Is they don't have the time and money to film these different things that they're not even going to use. They kind of have to figure out what's going to be exactly used before they start, which is also why it's kind of harder to get it to work like they thought in their head, because sometimes something seems great on paper, it seems great while you're shooting it, and then you get into editing and you're like, oh, this isn't working. But because they don't have the other scene or the other footage or whatever that they don't have, they can't change it around. And I think that is also why, I think that's also why Hollywood movies get this, like a lot of flack and stuff, because they have so much to work with. They had so much money to be able to do these things, that if they don't get the story right, it gets on a lot of people's nerves, because they have they're able to get everything done. This isn't every single one. Sometimes the producers step in and they're like, hey, we should do this for future movies, or hey, we should do that, and they start getting involved, or the production company themselves. And I don't think that should happen, because I think you should leave it up to the director. That's just my opinion, depending on what the director's doing anyway. Sometimes the director is making something that's kind of not going to work, and the producer calls them out on it.
But then you also have the fact of who's paying for it, and that kind of thing, which also complicates things a lot. But this whole conversation, like, it reminded me a lot of when we were watching the Truman Show, and we were discussing about how like budgets and stuff like that, and how you see these people do so much with the little they're given, and it just seems like some company, some industries, some companies, some movies just take it for granted, and they spend like these millions and millions of dollars that they don't need to, or that they might not have needed to as much. And you're like, well, and it still doesn't turn out that great either. And you always wonder like what part of that was because they had an inflated budget, but what part of that was the VFX, was the editing, was the, like, it's so easy for you to watch a movie and like nitpick the things, but when you go down to it, it is hard. Not always. Sometimes it can be very clear. Oh, the editing's choppy, the special effects suck. But sometimes it can be very hard to pinpoint exactly where something went wrong.
Right. And
Because-
sometimes it's not even about money, it's more about schedule. Like with visual effects, that is often because they don't have time to be able to get it done properly. They have a time crunch because post-production took too long or production ran behind. And because they already had, we're going to be shooting this thing and we're going to be releasing it in a year and 8 months. So we're going to start pre-production today. And then they start pre-production, and pre-production's taking longer because they forgot they needed to figure out this one thing and blah, 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 blah. And then, okay, now production's a little bit behind. Production starts and production is going bad. One of the actors quits. So now they have to find a new actor and reshoot their scenes and whatever else. So now they're behind on that. And now it gets to post-production and so on until it gets to visual effects where they're like, well, now you guys have 3 weeks. And they have to do these they do it by frames. They do it by shots because each frame they have to make their visual effects in and make it appear good and make it flow well. So they're like, we have to do, 300 different shots of this or that. And then we have to do this and that. And we have to add in this background and we have to do that. So sometimes they look bad, even though it's a big movie, a big budget, because the timing is so small that they don't have time to work on it properly. So there are a lot of different reasons why something goes wrong, but people will get mad at Hollywood movies because of that, I think. And we give independent films more of a pass because they had less and they worked well with it compared to a Hollywood movie that has a lot more and didn't work well with it or didn't do the story or focus too much on one thing, but didn't
or took some of the
focus
things
on the
for
main thing, which is the
or
story.
budget or like the story, or sometimes when it's lazy because this is a sequel of something, so of course people are going to watch it. And so yeah, we hold it to a higher regard because they have and I feel like in a way we should, but it can be hard because sometimes we will give, I know for a fact sometimes people will give the actor a lot of a lot of complaints and go heavy on them, and sometimes they just didn't have much to work with as far as directing or writing as well. So yeah, it can be a lot. Did you see V's question?
No. Oh, could the file change if saved to computer as backup, like the size, quality? Is this why it's best to use software? So the file itself, if you're just saving the file into a backup, it shouldn't change. The size and the quality and all that shouldn't change. If you're editing it and then you're exporting it or rendering it, then it does have a change. And that can negatively affect the quality because it starts to compress it down. We'll learn more about that as well. Codecs and all these other things later on in the semester. But just saving it, I don't think that affects it. I think that's just making like a copy. And I don't think that would really change it. Now, the thing you back it up to could mess up. If you back it up to an external hard drive and you plug it back in and it can't read it on the computer, well, now you have a problem because you can't even access your backup. So there are things like that. But as far as the actual file itself, I'm pretty sure it's just kind of making a copy of it and it doesn't really affect anything like that. But I don't know, maybe there is. Also, yeah, Sarah's right. She said there's different amounts of pressure and less room for mistakes because fixing on a bigger scale takes more. So there's also that. So there's different reasons for different things to happen. But yeah, I thought that was interesting, and Priscilla did too, that they shoot so much and then they don't even use half of it sometimes, which is kind of crazy. But like I said, I'm not sure how much of that is like extra, like different scenes, and how much of that is just meaning, well, they shot 7 takes, but they only use 1. That's with everything. So I don't know how much, I don't know where that time is going, is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, no, yeah, it seems kind of like a lot, but I guess like you're shooting and you also have like one scene and like multiple takes, that it would be like time. And yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah.
And so yeah, and if you think about that too, working under that kind of pressure, that it's it's a lot, right? So it's like if you make a mistake on a grand scale, it could be, you know, huge. Versus like if you make a mistake on a small film, it's like, oh, well, we could just fix that. Where that same mistake on a blown up might take 3 weeks to fix.
Right.
And that's
And it's
something
also
to
not even just
consider.
that, but it's also the expectations of the audience. Because we
Yeah.
already have we have higher expectations for that film. I've heard plenty of directors that worked on these huge budget movies that are like, I don't really want to do that anymore. It's too much, because you have to think about the future, and you have to think about a tie-in, and you have to think about a possible sequel, and you have to think about adding in this thing and that thing. Or even if it's not like a franchise like Marvel, I've heard people just be like, I didn't like working on this big budget movie because there was so much expectation of me to get it exactly right. And if I did it, I felt like a failure. And it's like, it's just it's a lot more pressure and a lot more expectation whenever you're on one of those kinds of films.
Definitely. But if you are good and you get good at that, say you're in that high pressure scenario and it's like the first time running in the high pressure scenario, it's really overwhelming. But if you go back in, it will not be the same, because it'll be different. Like things are always different. But what I mean is, like, you do get used, like if you do end up in a position where you have to deal with pressure, if you manage it properly, you can, how to explain that? Like it becomes your new normal, if that makes any sense. You're
Like
able
you can
to
handle it better from then on.
Yeah. So those are things to consider and think about.
Right.
If you happen to be in that situation yourself.
Yeah. So back to this. So the spotting session is done by director, producer, and a few other people. They watch it and they just see where these different things are going to be needed: sound effects, who's going to be doing those sound effects. They see ADR, where it's going to be needed, any ADR lines that are going to be added or need to be changed, or just, added over what's already there because that previous sound recording didn't work, and any music that needs to be put in and where. And they'll put in, like on this sheet, they'll make a what's it called? I think it's a cue card or something like that, where they make where the time that it goes in, the time that it goes out. So from here to here, we need these sound effects, and from here to here, we need this. And then they might go in and make it a little more condensed and specific. Somebody will look at it and make it a little more specific depending on who it's passed to. Like if it's passed to the sound designer or sound mixer, they'll say, okay, I see they say from 4 seconds to 7 seconds in, they need a gun noise, and they need a car and a tire streak noise. And then they'll look exactly where those are needed, and they'll pinpoint it. And they'll send that off to Foley or whoever needs to record those sounds, and then they can put those in at those exact spots. And that way everybody has the exact moments that are needed to be those pieces of sound are needed to be put in, or music or anything like that. So after the picture lock, sound can start working on it as well. And after they get that spotting session, they start seeing where to put sound. They'll also start working on just editing the sound, making it sound better, reworking it, kicking out any kind of unwanted noise, different things like that. They'll start working on all of that to get it to sound as best as they can from the actual dialogue that was recorded on set. And then they'll pass it off to Foley, sound engineering, sound design, until all those are done. I'm just going to quickly go through these, and then I'll read through my notes of what other people have said. And then there's those ADR sessions that we were talking about. And this is usually done in chunks. It's not all sent at once. It's usually done like little bit by little bit, because you won't need the same actor for it, first of all. Usually you'll need like different actors to do their different ADR pieces, but also so that it's not overwhelming. maybe they'll do like a few days or a week or 2 weeks or however long they need to, depending on how much ADR they need to do, but they're not going to do it all at once because it's going to take too long. So they'll send pieces of footage and say, hey, we need ADR for this, usually. You also have the composition that starts getting created depending on the notes given. The composer will probably usually sit in with the spotting session, or they'll have their own with the director so that the director and the composer can kind of hash out what needs to be done, what kind of music they're looking for and things like that. So there'll definitely be a big conversation about it, and they'll start creating the songs, or somebody will start working on getting the soundtrack. If they're not going to compose music for it, they're just going to get other songs. They'll start getting the licenses and well, not really getting the licenses yet, I don't think. I think they put the songs in the film and see if it works. And then if they like it and the director likes it and he signs off on it and the producer signs off on the price, then they start getting the licenses for all those different kinds of music pieces, which is a whole other process in itself, basically. Also, after picture lock, if you have multiple departments, then they'll be working simultaneously. It's not going to be in linear fashion. It's not going to go to sound and then go to visual effects. Depending on the set, it might. Depending on the production, it might. But most workflows, if you have the different teams, you have centralized, you have the footage in a centralized place that everybody can access. And then they all work on it at once. So visual effects will be working while sound is working. And then whenever the visual effects gets back, the sound can work on making sounds for that visual effects scene and different things like that. And visual effects can be anything from like compositing and keying, CGI, and a bunch more. There's bunches of different kinds of things you can do with visual effects. So it's not all as heavy. Like CGI, like I said, that's going to be part of the process. Normally what they do on bigger budget stuff is they have like you can see in the top picture where he's in that mocap suit where they're capturing his facial movements and they're capturing him moving around in general. They'll have somebody that is working with a CGI team there showing the director what it looks like on a screen, because it's kind of being live fed as like a pre-rendered version of what it could look like, so that the director can see what they like, what they don't like, and where it's moving around in the scene and things like that. That way it's not all up to the visual effects artist later on, CGI artist. It is also being done on set. But if you just have something in the background, like you have a green screen and you're going to add a city in the background, then that can just be done in later, and it might not have the people on set working with you to tell you how to do it as much as the CGI and stuff like that would, because that's a lot more intensive and needs a lot of feedback. But it just depends what the production is. It depends. Like maybe the person was hired, the visual effects supervisor often is on set to kind of go over, hey, so this part's not going to work, or helping to helping to make sure that the lighting of the green screen and stuff like that is good. So it all really depends on the production and when the people were hired and things like that. So after the picture lock is done, and apparently this is either this can be during the visual effects or it's after the visual effects. I thought it would be after always, but maybe they just kind of tweak it or tweak the visual effects to it, but it's the color grade, the color correcting and color grade. So first you color correct it, and sometimes this is done as like a placeholder as well. It's something I forgot to mention. This color correcting is sometimes done. Actually, I think it's quite often done in the edit, just to get it kind of looking how it's going to look a little better. When you have that raw footage, it looks a little desaturated and a little ugly. And that's because it has a lot more information that can be used to increase those colors and change them and make them however you want. So in the edit, while they're doing the picture edit, they will usually do like a placeholder color correction, or just put in a LUT, which is like a lookup table, which just adds its own colors to it. That way they can kind of see what the end footage might look like. while they're editing. But once it gets to this step, they are going to fully correct that color correction. And color correction is different than color grade, which we'll learn about later in the semester as well. Color correcting means that you're making it look how we saw it, how we see it. And then color grading is like adding style to it or adding extra saturation or making it more cinematic looking, or taking away some of that saturation and making it look a little murkier or gray or whatever you want to do. There's so many things you can do in the color grade to make it look different, and it gives the film a different feel. And so this will usually have the cinematographer. They will often come back for this step because they were the ones who shot it. They're the ones who are in charge of the way the film looks for the most part. So they will come back and they will overview or help with the color grading to make sure it stays in line with what they were wanting, but also looking a lot better than what was captured in camera, because what's captured in camera looks ugly for that reason, so that they can adjust it and make it look better, giving it more information to work with so that they can adjust shadows and highlights and colors and make it look a lot different to how they want it to be.
So of course, like as we learn this semester, we're going to be looking at a lot more, a lot of different sources, and we're going to be looking at a lot of different perspectives and hearing from a lot of different perspectives. So we're probably going to be adding to that information throughout, but it has been pretty cool to like see how much, like, it does give you a little bit of pride when you're like, oh cool, I already knew some of this stuff, at least for me, and I know for Code a little bit. It's like, oh, I feel so much better. I actually know some of this stuff.
Yeah, like we've already talked about a lot of this, and a lot of this that we haven't talked about is going to be like talked about later. Like we're going to dive deeper into it. This is just a more of an overview of,
which is going to be
things.
a lot more fun. I don't know, some semesters I'd hear stuff and I'd be like, that's interesting, but then it's like, oh, we'll talk about this more next semester once we delve deeper. And I'm like, okay. Because I was curious and I had like questions and stuff. And then I did my own and I was like, is it okay to do your
yeah, whatever you want to learn. I don't care.
No, I know, but it was kind of like we already were learning so much and we already had a bunch of stuff, and I already had to worry about, work and school and all this kind of stuff. So it was just like, do I have time to learn about this? Because I feel like once we get to that semester, I'm probably going to forget.
Right.
So yeah, because like you don't think about it, but you end up forgetting stuff because you're like, oh yeah, when we learn about this, I'll ask that, and the next thing you know, you completely.
Here's the thing, Priscilla. I just want to add in to help with that a little bit, because oops, that's not on me. So I understand, like when you learn something new and you have all that information, it goes in your brain, and then it's been a while and it feels like you forgot it all. But the thing is you haven't completely. So the next time it gets brought up, your brain has already like sponged a lot of it. So it clicks so much faster, and you could just do a quick review versus having this. Maybe the first time you learned it, it took 10 hours. The second time you can review it in an hour. If that makes any sense. It might not be completely at the tip of your finger.
Definitely.
Oh yeah, like
all the time,
information,
but it's not completely gone. So
right.
You don't have to completely worry. But I understand that feeling too.
Oh no, yeah, definitely. I'm just an anxious person, so I'm like, am I gonna remember to ask this later? Am I gonna remember to?
Oh,
like
I'm
when
sure.
Like when
if you don't remember to ask, then you probably learned it then. I feel.
No, yeah, I just mean like a good example was like when we were talking about production, and I was looking up all this stuff on the on like what a huge contribution like costume design and set design has to everything. Man, I can't wait to look deeper into that in the future. And lighting, like last semester we learned so much about lighting, and the semester before that I was just like so curious to learn more about it. It's exciting. It's really fun, and learning with you guys is really fun. But
I
it
agree.
can be like very overwhelming.
Yeah, sometimes, and I notice like before, like I'll sometimes come up against like exhaustion wall where it's like you've absorbed so much information for that day or that week. And it's just like at this point, you're like, you have to either take a break or take 5 minutes because it's like it starts to like you get the blank face when it's just
No,
like
yeah,
you absorb so much information.
Yeah.
It's like you have to let it
Notice as
sink
I
in a
have
little.
that, I get that face where he says it feels like there's like smoke coming out of my ears. It's the face that he
Yeah.
says I get. No, but like for me, I feel like the overwhelmingness is like when you think you know something, like film is something that's constantly evolving.
Yeah.
And one thing that we were learning while we were watching is like, oh yeah, this thing's going to have an update and that thing's going to have an update.
Mhm.
And you also have to make sure that your files are, adapted to this and that and this and that. Oh, and now there's this. And I'm like, holy crap, like you really, it's like, I'm not going to compare it to medicine exact because medicine's like, but
It's different,
it
but
is
I
a little
understand.
like it in the sense that it's something that's evolving and growing and you might think but things change all the time.
Actually, I would say there's a very big parallel between medicine, high-end like hospital stuff. I mean, it's different, like the budgets aren't quite the same on hospitals, but there is like really high-end like gear and things that a lot of like staff need to know as well. It's not
No,
quite
I just mean
Right.
in the sense
and it
of like
always is
if you're a
evolving and changing
doctor,
too.
I just mean like in the
At a high
sense of
level.
if you're a doctor, you constantly have to keep learning and going to conferences and
Mhm.
reading up more because there's always new stuff in your field.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I feel with filmmaking too. It's like you think you know something and then this new thing comes out, or we are learning more about this, or there's like a development in this, or
Mhm.
someone did this new and now it's a thing. And so yeah, it can be a little overwhelming in that sense that like you think you know something and then you learn, oh, I don't know crap.
No,
So,
that's
like,
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's and you have to this information is amazing, and technology and the what we can do as like a species is really fucking cool.
yeah.
I don't know.
Anyway.
I just want to say like it's
No,
cool, but like it's endless. So you have to just be like nice to yourself.
yeah. And if we actually stop and think about it, film is a relatively new thing too. It's only been like in the past 100 or so years.
Oh yeah.
So for it to have grown that much in that little time is also pretty freaking awesome. But yeah, honey, I just wanted to state that because it's like it's awesome, but at the same time, it can be a little like jarring at times.
Right. No, yeah, and that's why I kind of like learning a little bit about all this stuff because I like to have like a general overview of all of it. Of course, if you were actually wanting to do, lighting, or if you actually want to be a gaffer or a DP, you're gonna have to delve in a lot deeper than we were able to because it's going to be a lot more specialized. There's going to be a lot more things, a lot more little pieces of information or how you do things or how you get it done quicker that we weren't able to cover. And that's just with any of this stuff. Anybody wants to do anything, they're going to have to, study more about it themselves. But I like having a general overview of everything just to have a grasp of what's going on and what all these people are working on and who needs to be on the production and why and what they're doing and stuff like that. But yeah, okay. So after everything's pretty much done on the sound end, and usually after the visual effects, because they'll need to add in sounds for that and make sure that looks good, it'll go to a sound mixer and they will mix, or a team of sound mixers, and they will mix all the sound effects, the Foley, the ADR, the dialogue, and the music, which we learned about a little last semester, but they just adjust all the levels. They make it all sound good. They highlight one thing over another, depending on what the scene needs. They might quiet everything down in certain moments to make you just focus on visually what's there. Or if you're in a character's head and they're freaking out, they'll often do that thing where they take down all the sounds and then all of a sudden all the sound comes back as they snap back into it. Things like that will be done in the sound mix. And then they'll have the director and the producer and maybe a few other people sit in and watch while they do the sound mix again until they get it to the final mix when they are done and they say, that's good. I like how that sounds. And they'll be sitting in like a room that looks like a theater if it's a bigger budget, or in a little, they'll have their own little setup if it's a smaller budget, kind of like this person looks where they are. So it just depends again on the budget and stuff, but that'll be when you finish, you take all of the sound that you've recorded, all of the sound that was in production, all the dialogue and everything, put it all together to make sure it all works the way that it was intended to. Movie marketing is going to be something that's done throughout. There's not really a certain time that every movie does it. Different movies will start it a lot earlier than others. It also depends on how big the budget is for the marketing. Depends on how big the name of the thing is. Like, again, I'm going back to Marvel movies because they already started sort of marketing them a little bit just by giving out that plan of what's coming next. Just having a name in general is marketing for Marvel because it's so recognizable that people can hear the name and go, oh, there's a new Thor movie coming out in 3 years. And if you said that about any other film, no one would know or care because they wouldn't really know what it is. What was that movie called with the Book of Water or the Love of Water? I can't remember. Honey, what's it called?
The Shape of Water.
The Shape of Water. If you gave that out 3 years in advance, no one would know or care what that is unless it came from a book, and then maybe some of the people who read the book would know. But for the most part, it's not really going to be as. You're muted.
That's why there was no comment about the creepy alien sex thing. All right, so
is it an alien
fair,
if it's native to Earth?
I mean, it's still creepy.
Is that a spoiler?
Well,
No.
actually, I
I've never
haven't
seen
seen
the
the
movie,
movie.
I'm pretty sure it's
I haven't seen it either.
because it was all up in the promo photos. It was some creepy shiz. Anyway, so what was I gonna say? No, we should not watch it, Rafa. What is wrong with you? You watch it on your own time, you perv. Anyway, so what was I saying? Man, Raphael, you and your perverted thoughts confuse me. Oh, right. To be fair, though, that's the thing. Marvel, it's their marketing because not very many people knew who Iron Man was until the Iron Man movies came out. Like, he was a lesser known hero in the comics. Like, only the people who read the comics would know. And then people who were just like casual viewers, they really didn't know. And because their marketing, what they did was, all right, we're going to take these heroes that are a little more known, or these heroes that we're making more known, and we're going to use them to promote other stories that we're also going to. So their marketing was genius in that sense, that right. They took a movie that people were more interested in, a hero that they had developed more or that was already more known, like the Hulk and stuff like that, or Iron Man, and then towards the end they put the end credit scene or mid credit scene for the next movie, which was I think it was Iron Man, where the end credit scene was Thor's hammer. And I remember, I think it was one of the Iron Man movies because I was in the theater with my brother and we saw it, and it was like the hammer, and we knew. And I remember actually hearing like, in the theater. It's like, what's that? From a few people. And so, because we were like big nerds, we knew what it was, but not a lot of people did. And they used that to promote another hero.
Right. So for them, their marketing, I mean, you can call it marketing, like it is marketing, but it's not kind of really the same. But their marketing for those movies started way before they even started filming. And that was to increase interest in those projects because they knew some people would get it, and the people who didn't, it might make you be like, what is this? And then look it up, and then you start getting interested in it, and then you start
like scenes. There are so many people that I remember because I went to watch a lot of the Marvel movies where after the movie ended, quote unquote, a lot of people would leave, and a lot of people that knew what was up, they were like, dude, why are you leaving? There's more. Like, but they didn't know that. It wasn't a well-known thing yet. Or
Wait,
it
yeah,
was
when did that start? Like the
it was
whole
only a Marvel
post-credit
thing
city
back.
scene thing. Like when did it start? Because I know a
Marvel
lot of
did not
movies
I
do
mean,
it
do it
now.
from
first.
the
I don't think it
first.
started with Marvel. Post credit
Yeah.
No, it
scenes.
did
I
I
not
know
start
there.
with Marvel.
I know
Because
there's
I
at least been like credit scenes in movies
No.
that like even like a comedy would
Where
have
they
a
hint
credit
it.
scene
Dude,
playing.
I
in the-
remember Scooby-Doo had a post-credit scene for
Scooby-Doo.
the next movie. I remember that when I watched Zombie Island.
But
was
sometimes
a
it wouldn't
credit-
even be for the next movie. It
Yeah,
would
it's
just
not
be like
always
an
for the next movie.
added,
Sometimes
like an added piece or an added scene.
yeah,
that they're
but
just
I
like,
just
hey, let's throw
remember-
this in at the end.
Because I was nostalgic. I was nostalgic a while back and I watched Scooby-Doo and Zombie Island again. And I remember there was a post-credit scene for like the one with the cyber monster thing, which sucked. That was like their worst movie ever.
I know what you're talking about.
That one sucks so bad. But there was a post-credit scene for it. And I was like, oh, would you look at that? So I do also remember like some other movies having it at the end where it wasn't even like Mel said, it wasn't even a for the next movie, but sometimes it was just like, oh, another scene, an extra scene at the end or something like that. So yeah, definitely Marvel didn't start it, but whoever came up with that strategy was genius, dude. Like,
Yeah.
I hope they had a raise because they were like, let's keep the suspense that it made people want to stay longer, and they gave them just enough at the beginning. It wasn't even like, this is not a spoiler for Spider-Man because people suck and I hate everyone.
No, don't give
that
out anything.
spoiled
Nope,
everything.
nope. I'm
No,
muting you.
I'm not.
I'm muting you. Nope, no spoilers.
Whoa,
No
wait,
non-spoilers
spoilers
either.
for like something that happened like 15 years ago.
I think she's talking about the new Spider-Man.
Oh, okay. I have not seen that yet.
Exactly. I don't want to give out any information at all. I don't want to be blamed for anything. Anyway, so with movie marketing though, like generally speaking with movie marketing, not with like Marvel and these huge studios that have started putting it in to movies.
You muted me.
I told you I was going to.
I'm not going to spoil it. I was just going to
Uh,
say that the last
I'm just
scene,
gonna.
Honey, I
I'm
don't
just
think
taking
you
my
should
headphones
say
off.
anything. I don't think
the
you should
last
say
scene was a
anything.
trailer for the next for another movie. That's what I was going to say.
Okay.
And that, but back then they didn't even do that. They just showed one scene that was like a hint at the next movie. So it evolved. There, I'm done.
All right.
That's all I was gonna say.
Generally
See?
speaking, for movie marketing, it'll happen sometime either in pre-production, production, or during post or after post-production, depending on the budget, depending on the film, depending on who's marketing it. Of course, if it's an independent film where a super micro budget independent film where you are doing everything in editing, you're going to be the one marketing it, or at least trying to market it. And so you won't be doing that until the very end. Or you might like start making a trailer sometime in the middle and like a poster, but marketing will be things like that: poster, trailer, things that will get interest, advertising it if you can, blasting it on social media, trying to get interest to people to come see your film or to come see your project, whatever it may be. And so for different films, it'll start at different times in the process, and it'll usually be a different department, and they'll have their own budget. So they kind of just do it as they go. Now the trailer, it won't happen until, at least one of the scenes or a few of the different scenes are finished, or at least mostly finished, to where they can just add in things for the trailer, like music playing over footage that doesn't need the dialogue. Things like that can work in a trailer, but they still need to have like pretty much a locked edit. Well, actually, no, because you'll see trailers that sometimes have footage in them that isn't even used in the actual film when you go see it in theaters. So trailers, depending on when they're going to be starting to be created as well, they'll just pick random footage and put it together to make it look cool. So that can happen as well. But sometimes a lot of films will try to wait until the picture is locked so that they're using actual pieces of footage that are going to be in the film itself. Because I've seen a lot of people get upset when they see part of something that doesn't end up being in the film, or vice versa. Sometimes they get upset when something is in the trailer and they're like, that's stupid, I don't want that in the film. And sometimes that'll get the filmmakers to take it out.
Or when the best part, like that you see in the trailer, you're like, man, that's such a cool scene, and you don't see it anywhere in the film at all.
Right. And then you get upset and you're like, oh, why wasn't that in the film? So a
And
lot
then
of like
sometimes-
different companies do different things, but some try to keep it until
What, Mel?
I was gonna say, and then sometimes your favorite part in the trailer is the like only appealing
best
part of the
part,
film.
yeah.
I hate that. I hate that every time because it's like a tease, and then I'm like, I want to watch that, but then it's like, so underwhelming.
That was the best.
right, like they
moment
pick out
of
the best jokes in this comedy movie, so you think the comedy's gonna be great, and then you go look at it, and it's like, oh man, this
and it
comedy is not
sucks. And
what I
those were like the
thought.
only funny jokes in the entire movie. Gosh, that sucks.
Yeah,
so bad.
basically
I think the
trailers
biggest
always
scam.
lie.
Trailers, yeah, that's why I'm
Trailers
saying like
suck.
some companies will try to keep it until the picture lock so that they are avoiding that, and other companies will just try to use it to get hype, whether that's going to be used or not, they don't care. And some will try to market it as something that it's not. Like I think Blade Runner
Jennifer's
had this
Body
problem
and
where they
how horrible
marketed
that
it.
was marketed.
What?
Jennifer's Body, how horrible that was marketed, because Megan Fox was like the sex symbol or whatever, and so they made it seem like a movie that it completely was not.
That, and then there's also Blade Runner was made to seem more like a Star Wars kind of thing or something like that, when it's really not, and it's very
Underrated.
different, and they should have shown the different things. Yeah, hype, as if it's a technical term for trailers.
Just the way you pronounced it, it sounded like a technical term.
I will say,
Sounded like he was
this
using
is
air
fun.
quotes.
Just like for
Right.
research, this is not for fun, for research and a little bit of fun. Watch trailers from the 2000s.
No.
The narration every time, like the same voice narrator. for
Ian
every-
Oh right, the guy
It
with the
just
deep
sounds-
voice.
Oh yeah.
James didn't know who he wanted to be
It's so bad.
until he met Chloe.
No, you're not even wrong. You're not even wrong. So yeah, I was watching a trailer for the holiday because I really like got nostalgic, and that was like one of my favorite Christmas movies.
It's a cute one.
And it is so cute. And I'm not really a rom-com kind of person. I'm very picky with my rom-coms. But gosh, like the trailer was so, and it was supposed to be because there's a narrator in her voice, and it's like her internal dialogue is that narrator. But man, it's just, they were making fun of trailer tropes before it was cool and before it was a thing. Just love that. Okay, we can continue now. I just wanted to give everyone that advice because it can be very fun, but also very interesting to see how trailers evolved over time.
Yeah.
And how now they're basically just like emotional moments and like say something emotional and Oscar worthy into the
Actually, recently I was like watching this like hour-long video on YouTube that just was a mashup of like new trailers for upcoming movies, and after a while it starts to like everything just blends together, and it all just kind of seems like everything is kind of the same, you know?
No, yeah.
Yeah, because they
have the
always
same-
they're starting to like some, like I said, some companies are the ones for big budget Hollywood films. A lot of the stuff is being outsourced to the same company that has a good reputation or something like that, and they like to edit their trailers in a certain way. And so then you'll see a lot of the same trailers, and then you'll see like, oh, that big movie that made a lot of money, their trailer was like this, and a lot of people went to go see it. Let's copy their trailer and how they did it. And
Because
so you'll
God
see a lot of
forbid
like that.
we, be creative in Hollywood, huh? Do
Not
I
when
don't-
money's on the
that's-
line.
That's
Like they
risky,
are
yeah, money's on
creative
the
and a
line.
lot of the stuff I want to see, but like it just feels like everything is literally a copy of everything.
Right,
But
like the
that's the
format of the
thing.
trailer itself is pretty similar because
I
it
can't,
just
Yeah.
follows I'm sure it has to do a lot
Even
with
the
like all
posters
of
and
the
trailers.
research of like psychological research of how long will someone be engaged if this happens, and when do we need to do action, how long,
No,
you know,
yeah,
they study that so specifically that they end up, this is a personal thing I think, but they end up getting into a a rhythm of how it's the best. And it feels kind of like it's a computer in a way, where it's like the
Because
computer
it's a
saw
formula. They literally follow a formula.
the
And
algorithm computer guy
Yeah.
or whatever, the AI saw that at this, if you put this in your trailer, 80 more people will click on it, 80 more people will watch it for 15 more seconds. And so they do it with every single one. And that's just kind of how it feels.
And I
in
was
a
gonna
way.
say, I can kind of understand it though, like our cynicism aside, I can understand it from the perspective of money because especially now where we're putting like hundreds of millions into a movie, the return on investment is a huge thing. So the risk of investing in those movies are a lot larger now because you're putting a lot more money towards it than you were back then, even if you account for inflation. And they're afraid of losing return on investment because that can bankrupt a company, that can like put a lot of people's jobs on the line. So cynicism aside, I do understand it from that perspective. It
No,
still
I
sucks.
agree. I just had that thing I wanted to point out.
No, I
It
know. I
just
just know that
feels like
our
because they
brains
studied
complain
it,
about that.
they think that that's going to work. I mean, and it does work. It's proven to work. But because of that, they follow that formula every single time, and it starts to get old and repetitive. And they don't
Yeah.
realize it. I mean, it's the same thing in Hollywood with what's
Or
popular.
when they do,
With
they're
popular,
afraid
like,
of taking risks.
vampires is popular. And then all of a sudden you have so many things about vampires until people get so sick of it, and they don't realize it because these things are 2 or 3 or 4 years in production, that by the time that everybody's so sick of it and stop seeing it, they eventually stop making that content and focus on the next thing.
And another reason why they're afraid of taking risks is exactly because this thing is so popular right now that, let's be honest, most people, even back then when people went to the theater more, they would go to see stuff that they were interested in. Very few people, unless there were people that really loved movies, would take a chance on something different, on something new and interesting. And it was more common back then because they were like, oh, the cinema, it's so cool, let's go see what's in it. But now,
I agree with Mel. Mel said that's why in general it's good to not only watch blockbusters, but mix it up with more independent stuff. I agree.
Yeah, show them that you are interested. Show them that you are willing to pay for that different content. Speak with your dollars. That's the best thing you can do.
I also think that some of the streaming services, because of the way they're trying to get audiences and different niche audiences to subscribe to their platforms, they're able to put out more varied content than you would in a traditional theatrical release of a film. So I think that those platforms are starting to have a little bit more varied things that are a little more like that. What was that show called? Squid Game. Like Squid Game would never have been made for a Hollywood series or Hollywood. Well, I guess they don't make series, but
he tried to get it made.
You know what I mean? Like they wouldn't be made for a film, or it wouldn't be made for like a huge budget show, not for the most part, unless somebody took a huge chance on it. But because Netflix is
the premise
spreading
is
out and trying different things to try to see what works, what doesn't, they're able to get more varied content than you would if you had like a traditional theater release of that in like chunks for the movies.
And if I'm not mistaken, there's also the fact that before Squid Game, I don't remember which one it was. Oh, La Casa de Papel and all this other stuff. I'm sorry if I butchered it. I forgot what it was called in English. Oh, Money Heist. So basically, these non-American shows started being popular because they took a chance on like one or two. It's like, oh yeah, there's a lot of Spanish speaking people. Let's do that. And they saw, oh wait, people want this. People like care about. Will watch something that's dubbed if it's good. If it's a good story, cool. Then let's invest more in it. And there you go. And then like they try something here, they test it out, and it is sad to think that sometimes when they do test something out, timing is a huge thing, and sometimes the timing can be wrong, and then like it's not the right time for that thing, and it would have been so successful, but because people were distracted with something else or it wasn't right timing, it wasn't a hit. And then years later, that's how you get the cult classics and the sleeper hits and that kind of thing.
Same thing what used to happen with TV as well, when it would be airing at the same time as a show that was very popular. Those other shows, even if they were good, wouldn't be picked up anymore because they're not getting enough views as we want compared to, I mean, they would always compare it to Friends because Friends was so huge at the time. Everything was compared
Which
to when
sucked
Friends came
because
on.
you can't
If it was in
compare it
that
to
same time
literally-
slot, it usually didn't stand a chance no matter how good the show was because everybody liked watching Friends. And other things like that, other series have been the same, where it's like if it was popular, then that would be what was watched at that time. And then other things, other channels, other companies would try to compete with that one thing and try to get viewers to be on their channel at that time slot. And it wouldn't really work out as well. So I think I like streaming in that way as well. I'm a big fan of how I like the way it's been happening. A lot of people, some people complain about it and like the old way it used to be and how it used to just be easy to flip through and whatever
I
else.
get-
But I think
get-
streaming has really evolved TV beyond what it ever could have been if it was just regular network television like it used to be.
We had this argument a few weeks ago and he still hung up on it.
Was it
No,
about?
I mean, I'm
was
just
it
giving my
about
opinion
things
on it.
being all released at once so you can binge them?
I don't know. I kind of on the fence with that one because some shows kind of need it for me because they don't have enough to keep me engaged, like hooked for the next episode. That's probably with something to do with the writing of each episode. Some TV shows are made to make it like where you really want to watch the next episode and you have to wait, and that builds hype and gets everybody excited for it and lets them talk about it with each other. But other
Yeah,
shows, I feel like if they're waiting around, it's like, oh, what happened in that episode? And it's like, I don't know. Nothing really happened. It was kind of a filler episode.
It also
And that
does-
works. That works a
Same.
lot better. Filler episodes work a lot better whenever you have the whole thing at once. But I think people start forgetting about the thing that happened so quickly now because
Definitely.
they watch it in a day and they're like, oh, and then it's done. And so
I've noticed that like it
I'm
also
half
makes
half.
people. Oh, sorry, honey. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I'm
Okay.
sorry. I was just gonna say I've also noticed like two things that like one is that people will talk about it a lot longer and it will stay in your consciousness a lot more if it's a week to week thing. It'll build up hype. It'll make more people want to watch it that might have not initially. But it also can make it seem better than it was if it's all at once. I remember I watched like I think it was like the second or third season, I don't know which one it was, of Stranger Things all at once, and I was like, oh, this is actually pretty good. And then I watched it slower with Coda because he hadn't watched it, and I was like, oh, this isn't as good as I remember. Because there were a lot of filler episodes or there were a lot of slower episodes, and I was like, yeah, I didn't notice that watching it all at once, like binging it all at once.
Yeah, some shows are definitely written to be binged, but I do think that there is a problem, like just with socially, how not everyone has the time to watch all the episodes at once. And so then when something comes out with all the episodes at once, you have to just avoid everything until you can get around to it.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's so frustrating.
Did you see the end of the season of this thing and that thing happened? No, I didn't even start watching it.
Or it's
Now
not.
I know how it
it just
ends. Like, yeah, I hate that.
it doesn't feel the same either because you don't enjoy it as much. You don't get that anticipation. You don't get that, like, I don't know. It doesn't grow with you as much, in my opinion. For me personally, I don't feel as much of a connection to it when I binge it as when I watch an episode or a few episodes at a time, because I'm just like more invested and it starts growing on me and I start caring about it and thinking about it. Now, I do like what they're doing now. I think Disney started it and then HBO, where they like will release the first 2 or 3 episodes. I think Amazon
HBO was doing that before with Game of Thrones and everything.
Yeah, and then Amazon Prime did it, and then Disney did it, where they will release like 2 or 3 episodes at a time, or they will release the first 3 episodes or 2 episodes first to give you an idea of the show and to like get you started on the story, and then they will release it weekly. For example, WandaVision, I'm not spoiling it, but like the first 3 episodes, they needed to release those 3 together. and they released all the 3 at once, because otherwise you get a little confused about what it is in the first couple episodes, or like what's going on, and then you kind of get more invested and interested in like, oh, it's not going to be just this, it's going to be also that in it. And yeah, so I think that kind of like a mixture maybe would be good. Like,
Yeah, because I enjoy the cultural part of things coming out weekly, where everyone tries to figure out what's going to happen next, and people
Right.
come out with theories and all that. And you can't really
Yeah.
get that if it all comes out at once.
Yeah,
that was so
right. Then you just
fun.
talk about the
I-
next season, and it only happens for like a week or 2 or 3 after, and then everybody forgets about it until the next trailer for the next season comes out a year later.
And then you have the negative where like you spend way too much time thinking about a theory. Pretty Little Liars, where it started good and interesting, and then you're like, oh, I wonder if they're going to do this, and then it turns out, oh, the writers had no idea what they were doing, and they were just pulling stuff out of their butts, and like,
Oh, I
oh,
will
Or
say
the,
that
or
is
the huge
also, I
mistake
will
that was
say,
the BBC.
I will say I like that as well. I guess not for an entire show, it doesn't work, but per season, they have to have, like, if it is going to be released all at once, they have to really know what they're doing and where they're going with it from the beginning.
Yeah, because if they take
More
too
so-
long, then there's going to be way too much expectations and
yeah,
stuff.
you're going to build
Like,
up
that's
a
what
better
happened.
story in your head than it
That's what
actually-
happened with
Right.
the BBC Sherlock show. They
Yes.
took like 2 or 3 years after this cliffhanger, and everyone had come up with better theories.
Yep.
And they
In the
knew
show.
it. They knew that they
Yep.
had taken too long. So they just made this mishmash of like, it could be this or this to like
Right.
do damage control for it. But
Oh, no.
it did not
Yeah,
work.
it was,
Right.
yeah. And they don't even listen to the fans sometimes, because they're like, oh, well, the fans are expecting this, so just as a plot twist.
Yeah,
We're
we'll
gonna do
change it.
Ah,
Yeah, that's, yeah.
Like, no, that's the absolute opposite of what you should be doing.
Exactly, right? But no, they're like, oh, you didn't see this coming, did you? Oh, you thought it was this, but no, we did this instead.
Oh,
And
you
it's
think he's the one who
stupider.
killed him? Oh no, it's this other person that we
Stupider
haven't
and
shown
makes
at all.
no sense. But
Yeah, because like
you were
good reveals have proper foreshadowing.
Right.
yeah,
So like the fans
or
are
at
gonna
least
pick up
enough
on
of a
this
hint to where
foreshadowing.
you can really figure it. If you delve deep into it and look at every single point, you can figure it out for the most part, or at
There
least
is-
come to a few theories of he could do it because this, they could do it because that. But
There
when
is
they just
nothing-
pull it out and say, no, you know what? It's the guy down the street that nobody knew.
no, that's what I was gonna say. There is nothing that frustrates me more than a mystery where like you're trying to piece it together, and then at the end it was someone you didn't even know, that you never heard of until this moment. I was like, are you kidding? No.
Yeah, I hate that.
All right,
I'm
well,
getting-
let's get back
It's
to
drama
this.
territory. Let's keep going.
Yep.
Let's get back to this, to the editing workflow. So trailer will be made different times, depending on the film, depending on the production, things like that, as well as marketing. We already established that. After the movie is done, they make the final cut, and they do any they make any last minute change after the color grade and all that. They make any last minute changes, and then finalize it and make it into what's called the final cut. And then with that final cut, what the bigger productions will do that the smaller ones can't really do as much, because they don't have the budget for it, or they don't have the interest level for it, are what's called test screenings, which is just getting the target audiences that the marketing team or whoever, I think it's the marketing team and, like the director, producer, they all work together to figure out who this movie is for and what the target audience is. And then they get a group of people together to come watch it, how it is, and see their reaction and see what worked, what didn't work. Was there a part that everyone really hated? Is there a part that needs to be changed? And test screenings, I'm not exactly sure where this process starts. I don't know if it starts. I mean, it has to start after the lock and the sound is done and the picture is locked and the visual effects. But after that, it's kind of a guessing game of where they would start doing test screenings, if they would master it first. I'm not exactly sure how.
That's
how
something
they do.
probably be looking more into and talking about, because that's also something that I'm really curious about.
Right, because like there's a thing where you are making it for different. You make these what's called the DCP, which is a digital cinema package, and that's used for cinemas, like to show in theaters. So I would feel like if they're showing it in a theater and they want to see how the reaction would be, they have to master it to that. But then that's also a more expensive process. So I'm not sure if they just kind of show it another way and then go back and keep editing it and changing it around until it does a good test screening, and then master it and make it into and make the DCP for it. So I'm not exactly sure, because yeah, like Mel said, if it gets a very poor reception, they have to go back and rework a lot. And some of the biggest budget films have this problem where people don't like how it ended, or they don't like something that happened, and they have to go back and either rewrite it and reshoot it, or they have an alternate ending already where they put that in and go, okay, let's see how this does. Or okay, they try it with a few different groups. Obviously if it doesn't work with one, they'll be like, maybe it's not for them. Maybe our marketing team is wrong and it's not for 18 to 35-year-old males. Maybe it's for older males, or maybe it's for females, or maybe it's for younger preteens. I don't know. We'll figure it out. And they get different groups of people together to see who it works for, who it doesn't. And if it's having bad test screenings with everybody for the same parts, like if nobody likes
I actually have heard, I forgot which movie it was, but I have heard someone say that, like, I don't remember where I heard it, but they were talking about like, oh, we thought this would be a smash with the 18 to 25 demographic, but then it turns out that the 35 to 45 loved it, or this loved it, or oh, we thought this would work better as a drama, but apparently people loved it as a comedy, or something like that. So yeah, audiences can really surprise you, and it can it's so varied that I feel like a lot of variables can change that outcome.
So the most recent film I can think of that I knew that we were hearing that there were rumors that they were having a lot of trouble with test screenings and stuff was, what was that one called? Star Wars,
not The Last Jedi. No,
not the Last Jedi. The
see, it's so forgettable.
Like
What's the newest
like
one?
you mean the most recent one? Yeah, the Rise
The
of
Rise
Skywalker.
of Skywalker.
Yeah. Okay. So the Rise of Skywalker, it was rumored that they were having a lot of trouble with the ending,
No
and
one liked
there was
it.
5 different
They couldn't
endings,
please
and there was all
anybody.
these things, and so they kept retest screening it, and oh, this isn't working, and then they had to like go back and rewrite stuff and add stuff. There was rumors, but I mean, part of it's probably true. It's probably not to the extent the rumors were saying, or maybe it's even further than the rumors were saying. But that was out there, that they were having a lot of trouble with it, and they had to keep rewriting and reshooting new endings to try to see what works and what doesn't. Or that they had already shot 5 endings. It was something like that. And so then they kept trying the different endings to see which one people liked most.
It's almost like they should have had that all planned out from the beginning.
Right, yeah, it's almost like pre-production would be able to figure stuff out.
I just mean like the whole
It's
3
almost
movies.
I know,
like,
the whole
you're gonna
thing. When you have a
start-
series of
you're gonna
films, you
start a
really need
trilogy
to
that you know is gonna be a trilogy.
No,
Try
yeah, that's
planning
Oh,
it
definitely.
out.
Definitely,
Yeah,
yeah.
but then they
That
went
is
through like
something-
different directors, and like it changed hands a few times, and
Right,
it doesn't matter
but that
if you're
is
making
when
a trilogy.
no, but
You need to
that
have
is
an idea
when the
of where it's
director
going.
is, for those kinds of films, usually the director does not have as much say, because they can't, or they shouldn't, change it around to the point where it doesn't work as a cohesive trilogy of films. Usually if they have another director, they'll have the producer or executive producer or somebody will be saying, hey, and calling more of the shots, saying the director can't do this or they can't do that, or here's the confines I'm setting you in, do what you want within these confines, but you can't kill off this character, you can't do this, you can't rewrite this part, but you can do whatever else you want. They'll give them rules. And and they dropped the ball on that one. The person who was running the show on that one really dropped the ball, and they didn't really do what they were supposed to, and that's why the different directors handled it so differently than what they should, like what most people think they should have. Some people
Yeah,
love
I
it.
mean,
Some
yeah.
people love it, but
Very
it
few
happens
people.
with Marvel too.
Very few people.
right.
But
And Marvel had
they're
the same
out
people
there.
working on it for the most part, but then once they started dropping out, then it started going like all over the place. So it really,
Yes,
with those big things where everything should be connected and all that, you really have to have that person that's putting their all into it and has everything already in their head of what's going to be and leading the vision no matter where it's
for
going.
me, it just feels like it was one of those things where it was like, oh, it's Star Wars. They like it. We don't need to plan.
I mean,
and
they're
that's
kind
just
of
most
right. It
insulting.
still made money.
I mean, it made money because
Because
people
it
are
has a name,
going
yeah.
I mean, I
they're
think,
cheering.
I
yeah,
don't
it's
know.
it's
I
always
don't know.
gonna
I
make
would
money.
say it made money in the
It
movie
made less
theater,
money.
but it lost money in a bunch of other aspects. But
Yeah.
I mean, that's just going with those things as well. Like those things are also not even just looking at movie, which is why they start to go off the rails, in my opinion, is because they're looking at merchandise and they're looking at, ooh, we can make a ride out of this. And oh, what if we put a hotel that has it looks like this place or that references that, and then they put all this stuff in the movie that is like trying to connect these different things in the real world to the movie, to the other movies, to make an expanded universe of things. And it all kind of like sometimes falls apart and doesn't work, and it feels convoluted. Sometimes it works really well and they can pull it off, but it's very hard to get that to work well. Marvel was one of the first companies that were able to cohesively, at least enough, make a expanded universe of films that all kind of attached or referenced each other without it going off the rails and not making any sense. Like, of course, there's plot holes and all of that, and you can be like, why is this happening? And why aren't all the Avengers in each of these movies?
They did a pretty good job.
But they did a good
Or
enough
why are the
job,
Avengers
yeah, to
not
where
in
like
this
they made
movie or
that
this
much
TV
money and
show
got that much.
where
Yeah.
they clearly should be?
So yeah, it is
Yeah.
very different depending on the level that you are at.
And you can still make money, but they weren't making the money that they thought they were going to make. At the end of the day, a lot of the people going was just people that were eternal optimists or just wanted to see the train wreck that it was going to be.
Yeah. But anyway, that's why they'll have test screenings to see how the movie's working and if that target audience they think it's for is reacting to it well, receiving it well. And if they're not, but another audience is, then they'll start looking at, oh, maybe this is for a different audience than what we initially expected. We weren't expecting this. We didn't think that, this age group or this gender group or this race or whatever, like they always have to look at the analytics of everything of who's going to like this movie, who's not. And so they break it down into those things and group people into those stereotypes, but then they just see if it works with that group or not. And then they keep trying over and over until they get it right, or they keep rewriting and remaking the movie until they get the movie right, depending on whatever's not working. Like I was saying, DCP, they make a DCP. There's also other ones. These are called like, once the movie's completed, the test screenings worked, their target audience, they've got it. They know who they're going to target it to. And they know, where it's going to be released or whatever. They start making what's called the DCP, Digital Cinema Package. That's usually sent to another company, unless, I don't know, it probably depends on how big the company is. I'm sure a lot of the big ones have in-house people that can do this, but depending on like the budget, you'll give it off to you'll outsource it to a different company that will work on making a DCP, which is it's basically like making the best possible version of each of the scenes and everything. It's making it like what am I trying to say? It is making the codec and everything as big as it can be without becoming a problem, so that it has all the information it needs, more so than you would need anywhere else, so that these are able to be shown in theaters and still look good and look the way it should and work properly. And, you know, working on the sound and everything to make it, the sound files, to make sure they're good enough and big enough to work in the theater as well, because the theater has all these specialized equipment for those sounds to work that you're not going to get in a home theater, for instance. So a DCP is just one kind of deliverable, and that's only if you're going to do a theater run. If you're going to show it in theaters, you have to have this. Otherwise, it's not going to look or sound good up to the standards of each theater, and they're not going to let you have it in their theater. So you have to do this, and it can be expensive depending on what it is, because they have to like up-res everything. Resolution, that's what I was going to say. They up-res it and make it all a lot bigger, and they make it all a lot, like the file sizes are a lot larger because of it. And then they
Now, we would blame the theater for our case, or would we blame the movie? I was thinking about that because we went to watch
No,
Spider-Man.
that's totally the theater.
I feel like that's the theater's fault, right? The sound
Yeah.
was so bad. We were like, man, our home theater sounds better than this. And this is a blockbuster movie, for goodness sake. I feel like they wanted to do way too many screenings because they had a screening every like 30 minutes that day. And I was like, I feel like they wanted to do too many screenings. So they ended up using older theater rooms or theater rooms that like weren't meant for that particular thing. And we just were one of the unlucky few that ended up paying for it.
Right, but it would still be shown on this thing, and it would be up to the standards of every other part, especially for a movie as big as.
But wouldn't that be on the production? Not production. Wouldn't that be on the? I mean, yeah, production. Whoever outsources the film to be like, because isn't there like a agreement that they have to do with the theater? Like, oh, you're going to show it this many times. You're going to have this many showings.
I'm not sure. So this is all stuff that has to do with distribution, and that is also something that we're going to learn later on.
Okay.
Distribution is the final step in the post-production workflow, but it is a whole other beast on itself. So that and marketing are going to be in different semesters.
Because I was so
distribution next semester, marketing the final semester. But
because I somewhere that like some places have like agreements with the theaters where it's like, okay, we'll bring it, we'll let you we'll let you screen it only if you agree to show it in this many theaters or in that this many time slots. And I was like, I wonder if they agreed to put it in that theater if they showed this many times and the theater just didn't have enough screening rooms for it or something like that.
That's sometimes the case, but also the case is just it's such a big movie that they want to get as much people in to watch it as possible, and the only way to do that is to show it as so many times. So they don't show other movies and show just that one more, so that there's more times people can watch that movie. If that makes sense. So like for Spider-Man No Way Home, that is they took out other more independent films or lower budget films or less known big budget films, and they said, oh, we'll show that one, you know, maybe once a day or twice a day, but for this one we're going to show it 8 to 10 times, you know, and that can really start to add up depending on who wants to see it and when, because, you know, it's showing all the time, so you have any time you can watch it.
Yeah,
that's and I'm sure there's deals like that, but that would probably be with the company. You know, Regal Cinema is a company that has bunches of theaters all over the place, so it's not just that one that they're dealing with, it's all these other ones. So they probably have some kind of deal like that, like you said. I don't know.
No, yeah,
I'm not exactly sure how it works.
Thinking like, who is at fault in that situation? Would it be the cinema? Would it be the agreement they had? Would it be both?
I would say it's just the theater.
Yeah.
They wanted to like they wanted to show it in more, or it's just the way the theater's set up. Like sometimes, Jeremy Johns, he talked about that. Jeremy Johns, he used to work at a movie theater. He's a guy who does movie reviews on YouTube, if nobody knows what I'm talking about. But he was talking about how the theaters themselves would sometimes have like, they wouldn't set up the sound right, or they wouldn't set up the projector as well as they could have. So it doesn't look as good.
a projection operator or something like that.
Yeah, so it might not look as good as it could, or it doesn't sound as good as it could. And that's just because whoever's setting it up they had knowledge in it, but not as much as someone else who knew more and could do better and make it sound even better and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
it depends on a lot with that kind of thing.
You guys can tell I'm hurt. Okay, I paid for that biz, and then it turned out.
All right, but anyway, so deliverables is what you want to look at as an independent. If you're not going to be showing it in theaters, then you're not going to need this DCP, but you're going to need to master your film to different specs, because if you're gonna release it on DVD, and then you're also going to release it on Blu-ray, or if you're just going to put it on YouTube, or if you're going to put it on other websites that are or streaming services, then you have to set it up to those standards and those codecs that they allow, and those other things. So that will affect how the movie looks overall based on what it is, because some like DVDs don't have the codec that has as much color space. So it doesn't have as many colors in it as a Blu-ray disc, which is why people say Blu-ray discs look better. I agree. But some people like the way DVDs look better sometimes. Just depends on preference, but most people would agree Blu-ray is usually better. But because it's set in a different color space, you have to mess around with the colors again. You have to kind of recolor grade it so that it looks the same on both DVD and Blu-ray, the colors themselves.
If anyone owns a Blu-ray copy of Lord of the Rings, please throw it away and get the Ultimate Edition. It's sad.
Yeah, that's why also it depends on how old the movie is. They might put it out on a newer format and they'll recolor it. I think Lord of the Rings was more because they wanted to change the way it looked rather than they didn't know how. I'm pretty sure they knew how to do it. They just had they had a preference for doing it a different way, and the color grade, whoever was doing the color grade, did it a different way.
It looks awful.
But that's different because that came out later. We're talking about if you're releasing everything at the same time. You still need to make sure that it's going to work. It's going to look the same and sound the same through your computer if you're on YouTube as it would through your TV if you're showing it on a DVD. And so you have to set it up to those standards and recolor it so that once you're done and once you put it to that format, it looks and sounds the same.
But they do color grade it separately, right, for each format?
What?
But do they color grade it separately for each format?
I believe so. If it's using a different codec and things like that, like the underlying file is changing and it's going to change how much colors are in it. I think they have to, I think.
Yeah, I'm going to add that as something to look up as well, because that's something I'm curious about.
Right. And like I said, distribution and deliverables and stuff will look a lot more into next semester. And we'll talk about, and I'll have a better idea of it once I study it more. Right now I have a general idea, but I'll have a more specified idea of how each thing works later.
It's just funny. The stuff I get the most curious about, that's next semester. Every time.
And then finally you have the film's release, which again, we'll be talking about with distribution next semester more, but that's when you release your film. It's all good. Everybody's going to see it, whether you did it on a streaming service or in theaters or whatever. Everyone can go see it and you'll start receiving all the feedback and the money for it. Or you'll give it off to a distributor. If you're a lower budget, you'll give it to a distributor who will pay you for it, and then they'll make the money from the actual ticket sales and all that. Or they'll lose the money on it if it doesn't make as much.
I was going to say, or you just push your film as much as you can and end up not making your money back until 10 years later? Was that what the disaster with the roommate, 10 years, 20 years later?
Right.
To make the profit.
But yeah, does anyone have any questions or comments so far on that? I'm going to go through some of the notes I had from other people who we looked up this week in the syllabus. They had a bunch of stuff. That was my general idea of it after looking it up for a long time because I couldn't find the specific information I was wanting. And so I came up with that, which is generally speaking, that's how it goes. There's a lot more little steps and, different feedback loops that would keep going around, depending on who's working on the production and how their workflow is. But that will be up to, how many people you have. If you have a post-production supervisor or a coordinator who's working on that stuff and they're determining how they want the workflow to go, they'll pass it off to them, he'll pass it off to them. And then every production will be a little bit different in those aspects. And the timing of everything will be a little bit different depending on budget and things like that as well. All right, so no one has any questions then. This is basically what I just said, but this is from the Film Look. They're like an independent company that works on films and stuff, and they do a lot of YouTube videos and tutorials for people, and they're very helpful, I think. they know a lot, and they really explain it easily. And they said this is their workflow. They organize the footage and audio, then they sync the audio with the video. They do the first rough cut. They get the feedback from people, and they said they send it out to people that aren't, that don't know too much about filmmaking, and they also send it to people who do. That way they can get the technical feedback as well as general feedback and story feedback from people who don't really know too much. Or filmmakers will give the story feedback, but that way they can get different kinds of feedback, so it's not all just about one thing or another. And then they re-edit with their new feedback to the second rough cut, and they repeat step 4 and 5 until they like it. Picture lock. Then they do the sound design and Foley, music or composition, visual effects, sound mixing, color grade. They view it, and they say like they view it on multiple devices for the same reason why you would do it if you were releasing a film theatrically, and also if you were streaming it or something like that. You need to make sure it looks the same on multiple devices. If you take a movie, even if you're just going to put it on YouTube, you need to check it on, or if you're going to release it on your website, you need to check it on the computer, you need to check it on your phone, and you need to check it on TV, because it's going to change how it looks. It can change how the colors are going to be a little different, maybe especially like with brightness and darkness and brightness. Those can drastically change depending on the device that's used. So something that's looking great on TV that might have a little bit more pixels and stuff, that has more room for different shades and like different levels of darkness while still being able to be seen, might not look good on the computer or the phone and whatever you're using, because it's a smaller screen, so it might not work the same, or vice versa. Something that looks great on the phone because it's small and it looks, it looks really in focus. Focus is a big thing as well. Like if it's focused and it looks great, and then you look at it on the TV, you can start noticing a little bit more, that thing's out of focus or this. So certain things like that, you can start noticing and seeing if things work or not. And so they say to always view it on multiple devices before you finalize it and release it. Then they do their last minute changes, and then they do their final cut, and then they release it. That's how they do it. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that?
I'm good. Mel said colors can even look different between two devices of the same brand. And V said no, thank you.
Yeah, because I have both an iPhone and an iPad, and I'll do like digital art sometimes, and the colors can look very different when you go from one to the other looking at the same image.
Is it because like they're different screens, you think, like different resolutions?
I think they just have different configurations that I don't know the specifics of. Right. And I don't know enough about how those work.
Because I know like the bright gamut of the iPhone is completely different than of the iPad. So like the amount of brightness that you can get on an iPhone is higher than you can on an iPad, depending on the iPad.
It's
I
not
believe
just
it.
brightness though. It's like I'll draw a thing and then like I'll draw a thing on my iPad and it'll be like a bluish purple, but then I look at it on my iPhone and the purple is more reddish.
Right.
Yeah, it could be because of like the resolution. Like I know that the like 1080 or something like that. I'm not very well versed in that, but I do know that like the color spectrum, they're different depending on like the age of the iPhone or depending on the phone that comes out. Like even mine, which is like 2 years old, and the new one, like as far as like colors look different.
Mhm.
Codas,
And that's why hex codes are important for colors.
yeah, Codas
That
and
way you
mine,
can
we
like
both have
see
iPhones and
what this color is, no matter what device you're saying. Oh, it's 49 dB 78 or whatever, and then okay, that's the color.
I wonder if it would be, no, it probably would because it's different monitors.
So
That's the
what they were
thing.
saying, what they said is what they'll
Oh,
do is just make sure that like it still works, or you know, if it's something that's not working how they want it to, like color changing, and it's something that doesn't work because they're saying how red that thing is in the film, or oh, that apple's so
Yeah.
so red looking, or I don't know, whatever the comment is, and then like you look at it on another device and it looks more orange, they'll go back and they'll either try to adjust it somewhere in between so that it kind of works for both, or they said they would they re-release it for each device and like kind of block out the other one somehow. I don't know how that exactly that would work, but
as long as the
they
difference
say
isn't
like only if you're watching on iPad, put it on this, because things can pick up what you're viewing it from. So if you're doing it through a phone, they know you're doing it through a phone. If you're doing it through a computer, YouTube analytics will tell you all that. They'll say like, hey,
I also heard that like the owners of the screen, for example, like for the I think Samsung is the one that sources, if I'm not mistaken, the iPhone screens for the iPhone. I don't know if the iPad is the same, but yeah, even that, like even the different, because I always thought, oh, the colors is what makes the difference, right? Like the I don't know a lot about tech, but basically like the inside, you know, like the component, not the screen itself, but like the stuff in it. But even the screen is different. And so like you go into like how parts work and all this kind of stuff. And so yeah, it's crazy how complex it is. And I suppose the best you can do as a color grader is like try to find a good middle ground to where like it's not too much of a difference. And if it is, it's like it's subtle. It's like maybe a shade different, something like that, and something that wouldn't interfere with the story as well.
right. So I think the main part of like looking at it on different devices isn't usually the color, because colors usually don't tend to change that drastically. And if they do, it's not always extremely important to whatever's going on in the story. The more important thing I would say, if I were to look at it, where is exposure and how dark or bright the spots look. If you're shooting something very dark, is it going to work on the phone? Is it going to work on the computer the same? Because like Priscilla was talking about, they might have different exposure levels on the device itself. So do you want something to be seen in that shadow? If so, make sure that each device can see it. Do you want nothing to be seen? If so, make sure each
And I will
device
say,
doesn't see it.
when editing from experience, like how you have your brightness set makes a huge difference, because sometimes you have like your brightness low and you don't notice it and you edit it a certain way, and then when you brighten your it looks completely different. So having that leveled is super important.
Yeah, that's why when you're like editing actual like footage on the computer, you need to set it to some specified specs, because you want to have the color spectrum to be as close to what you can to like the standard as possible, and you want your exposure to be close to standard as possible. That way, if it looks bright on your screen, it's actually bright, and it's not like it looks bright on my screen, so I'm going to darken it, but on everyone else's screen, it's dark because your screen is just, you have the brightness up really high compared to the standard. So that is something you also have to look at when you're trying to edit on your own computer and things like that.
So Raphael said, even if you go to Walmart, all the TVs have different hues and presets. Okay.
Presets.
Gosh, words. I used to work in home improvement, and an industry tip I got from that is to not go by the digital color for physical products, because screen colors can show differently compared to paint swatches and whatnot. Yep, that's definitely true.
Yeah.
I've
All right. So
tried buying something and then it comes and it's a completely different color. Oh gosh, that's annoying.
yeah, that is very like buying online color stuff. If you're trying to match things, doesn't really work. We have experience in that. But anyway, so back to editing. Like this is from Raindance, and they from their website, they're talking about the workflow that most people will use, and this of course is medium or low budget most of the time for like these festivals and things like that. They say like a normal editing schedule, and this is just picture editing. A schedule for a feature film is about 8 to 10 weeks. So you give the picture editor about 8 to 10 weeks to start their rough cut and get it all the way to to locking that picture. The editor will do what's an EDL, which is an edit decision list. That's where the editor makes the decisions based on the script for how they think the film should be edited, which is why it's important to kind of to vet your editor before you get an editor. Kind of make sure you guys are on the same page about the story. Make sure they know what you want. Look at their previous work if they have it, and just make sure you're on the same page and you kind of have the same ideas about it, because you're kind of giving it up to them to create that film that you had in your head. So you need to be able to communicate with them, and they need to be able to communicate back with you to have a back and forth to get it right. Well, if you're the director, of course, then it's in your head. But if it's somebody else and you're working on their project, then you want to try to get them to explain it to you if they haven't. Because then you're going to scrub through that footage. You're going to find what you like, what you don't. And based on the script, based on the story, and based on what you've been told by the director of what their vision is, you start making the edit for like what works best, what doesn't. And then you edit the picture until you lock it, edit the sound until the sound is locked. They say you have about 5 to 6 weeks for the sound editor and their assistant to cut dialogue tracks, recreate sound effects, and get cue sheets ready for simplifying the sound mix. Cue sheets is like that, what we saw earlier. I think these. Where is it at? Yeah. Where it's like the timestamps of the different sounds that need to be put in or changed, or where their timestamps are. After they've already done it, I'm sure they just kind of put what they put in and why, and then the sound mixer can look at all this, and it really helps with them. But that's something I'm not exactly sure on either. But then they do ADR Foley, secure music for it, or they do the music composition. Then they do the sound mix. And then once all that is done and they get that sound mix good and completed, you will make what is called a M&E track. That's a music and effects track. That's if you're going to distribute it overseas to other countries and they're going to put in their own dubbing in their language. They don't want to have the dialogue in with all the other audio, and they only want to have the music and the effects, sound effects. And that way they can put in their own dialogue over the top of it and play it with their language. So that is something that if you are thinking of distributing it, or getting a distributor that's going to ship it off overseas to show, you're going to need a music and effects track to make sure that they can dub it in their own languages once they get it over there. And you'll do titles and the title crawl, which is like credits. DCP, which is the digital cinema package. Hard drive that contains final copy of the film, encoded so that it plays in cinemas. They're also going to make a dialogue script, which is a time code of each of the subtitles. Time code's just the timestamp where it needs to be put in. So that if it does ship to foreign countries, they know where to place the English subtitles. So that's something else that'll be put in if you're trying to get it distributed. You need to have those two things. We'll learn more about these, of course, next semester.
There's also, for people who don't hear so well.
Right. If they do want to, if they have English audio and they want to have subtitles as well.
Yeah, caption for also the hearing impaired. Yes.
Right.
Yes, that's the word.
Yeah. And so you'll put a dialogue script where you say this dialogue needs to be, the subtitle for this is inserted here at this time. This one's inserted here, and you go through and do that. And that's also why, like, I've seen some foreign films where it's in another language, but I'm watching it in English with English subtitles. And they're putting the subtitles in very differently than I would. Yeah, like they're not putting them in like this. The sentence kind of ends before the guy stops speaking, and then they put the next part of that sentence in the next subtitle. So if you are doing that, I would just say be careful with like where you're putting it so it kind of makes sense and flows, because sometimes it is a little weird.
So
that's what the time code is for.
Right.
There are some.
But I'm saying like sometimes the time code that, I don't know, some of the movies I've seen is like they'll put like go away, and then like the guy is still talking, so he's like, go away, I don't need you right here anymore, but it just says go away. So and it takes a second to put in the next part and say, I don't need you. And so by that point, he's already said what he said.
I mean, that sounds like bad time coding.
Right.
Yes, but also here's the thing. As someone who's watched a lot of dubbed stuff without a choice, unfortunately, for a lot of years, because you didn't have much of a choice back home. So sometimes it is that the whole thing in the other language it takes a lot longer to say than the written thing. So that's another case as well. Like sometimes a word will go on longer when it's spoken than the translation on the subtitles. And so the person will keep talking and it'll just be like that short thing, or vice versa, to where like the word will be short in that one language, but when it's in another language, it'll be a lot longer. And so they will have to keep that subtitle going so that they will, because they try to substitute it as well as they can. And that's why sometimes the dubbing sounds different than the subtitles more often than not, because with the dubbing, they have more of a time, like, constraint as well. They try to do the best they can to make it match, but they have certain constraints one way or the other, to where like, okay, can we substitute it so that it's shorter, or okay, is there anything that we can replace this word with because it's not, that would match more. And that's also another thing that can be really complicated that I've noticed, because you're trying to do the best you can to find an equivalent word. And sometimes it just doesn't work, to where it's either too long or too short. And it just becomes very glaring and obvious. And
right. What I was speaking on more was like, I've seen some things where the subtitles don't all come in where the guy or the girl or the character is speaking that sentence. It doesn't flow with the subtitles, which if I'm watching subtitles in English subtitles with English audio, I don't know, I just feel like it would be a little more lined up than what I've seen sometimes.
The English subtitles were not meant to be heard with the English audio. They were meant to be a replacement for someone who's watching it in that other language.
And it depends on the type of subtitles.
No, definitely. But more often than not, let's be completely honest, they don't really do the captioning thinking about the hearing impaired, which sucks. More often than not, they do it as a translation thing. That's what they're thinking about more than accessibility, which sucks, but that's the reality. And so they will focus more on that and getting it to other audiences and explaining it better in a quicker way, or summarizing.
I don't
a
know,
sentence.
because like I think it's just a mistake, because if I'm watching
Oh no, it's
something,
lazy. It's
no,
definitely lazy.
but if I'm watching something in another language and the guy is saying something on screen, but I'm still seeing the same subtitle, then like, where's the rest of it? I don't understand what he's saying. Like the second half of his sentence is cut off, and then it
No,
comes
yeah, it's
in.
definitely
It just
lazy.
off. It like puts off the movie a little bit, because you have to like wait for the subtitle.
Another
to
point
come,
is like they will
which I
not give
agree
you
is
the
just
exact
like bad
translation.
time coding, I think.
No, yeah, they won't give you the exact translation either. Like as someone who's like, for example, I watch on Netflix, and let's say I'm watching a Brazilian show, right? And I'm watching it with English subtitles, which has happened. I'm watching it in Portuguese, but I'm checking the English subtitles because I'm just curious, you know? And sometimes I will see something that's so blatantly wrong, and I'm like, that is not what? That's not, or vice versa, or it'll be in English and have Portuguese subtitles. And it is lazy, and sometimes it's because either the person translating it doesn't know that language very well. Sometimes that happens, and they will like do it to what they understand it to be, or they'll just like, this is a gist of it, which is incredibly frustrating, especially for people who watch anime. Go ahead.
I do watch a lot of things that are subtitled. Like I'd say like there are a lot of shows where people just don't enunciate their words very well. Like they mumble or something, and it can be good to just have subtitles on. And I swear, with a lot of shows, it's like the people who made the subtitles were not given the original script, because they'll just be flat out wrong sometimes.
I think it's actually the opposite problem. I think they were given the original script. They weren't given what was actually ended up being said.
No. Like there was an episode of Doctor Who where he says, you see these eyes, they're old eyes, but the subtitles said they're all lies. Like that means they were not given the script. They did it by ear.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, that's true.
I think that does happen in some cases, actually. Now that I'm remembering, like, I don't know where it was, but I think we were watching a video of like showing the audio process or something like that, and the person listening to the audio and then writing down.
Yeah, it's a job. Like, transcription.
Typing down what was said. I think that does happen, because I've seen it in a video. I can't remember where it was, but yeah, it does give you that feeling, doesn't it? That's something I'm going to add to the lookup list as well, because I'm curious.
The transcribing, it's often done by a third party who I think is not given the original transcript in the first place.
An example of that is YouTube's translate. Like YouTube's.
Oh, well, that's done by a robot.
That's now
They're saying that I don't remember where I heard it, but they said that YouTube is now doing a mix between AI and people so that they can get better at their closed captions, because a lot of people were complaining about it.
I remember a lot of people complained that YouTube took away the option for like people to submit subtitles to a video.
That too, yeah. And so they were saying like, oh, it was because we were getting way too many issues, and so from now on we will allow that, but we will also work in conjunction with people, like humans, to help with the subtitles or something like that. I could be wrong, but I heard that somewhere. And so like hopefully now it gets better, but yeah, it does make you think, doesn't it? Like, I wonder.
Well, this is also going to be something else we'll look deeper into next semester as well, because this has to do with
so I should look it up this week?
I mean, you can look it up if you want, but I'm not going to be touching on it until next semester, when we're actually focused on just this stuff.
The suspense, Mel, the suspense.
I mean, you can look it up on your own time, but yeah.
Right. Okay, so and then Raindance says after the dialogue script, you will start doing your campaign image, or aka poster, to get attention for your film. and start getting that interest level to start growing. And then you'll make a trailer about 90 to 120 seconds that will convey the mood and atmosphere of that film, show it off, and then marketing and a festival run. And that is their step-by-step guide, which is pretty good. Like I was interested to hear like the time that they gave, that they said like the standard time for different films, which of course is, you know, going to be different depending on how much post-production stuff is needed. But just saying like a normal editing schedule is about 8 to 10 weeks, and then 5 to 6 weeks for sound to edit the sound together, which isn't including sound mix. But I just thought that was kind of interesting to hear the times finally. Then there is, let's see. For the most part, Studio Binder is saying exactly what I was saying. The only thing I would add from Studio Binder's thing is just a note that they added saying that post-production is a collaborative effort. So finding people that can work together is a must, and you need to be able to trust them to do their jobs. If you're micromanaging people in post-production, their creativity is hindered, and then they're not even gonna want to work as well as they could, because they're going to not feel as good, and then even if they want to, they're gonna be more nervous about what they're allowed and not allowed to try. So you need to be able to trust people to do what they are hired to do. The editor needs to be able to edit, and the sound designer needs to be able to design all the sound, and the sound mixer needs to be able to mix it. And you just kind of overview it if you're the director or producer, instead of being in there for each session and, oh wait, do it differently and do it like this. Give them some freedom to let them try things and see what works and what doesn't, and then come back to them with notes. And that'll work out a lot better usually. They also added the thing about the placeholders, which is, I already went over all this, I think, where it's like CGI and visual effects will either have a storyboard, or it could have an animatic in place of it, or it could just be a title card saying big fight happens or something. And then they work it all out later. Because that's kind of like, once you start working with CGI and visual effects to a big extent, where a lot of your movie is just that, it starts becoming more like an animation movie, where you're having to see what it looks like before you can start putting it in the rest of the stuff. It's kind of like production in itself, where you're still recording the scenes, sort of. You're doing the CGI scenes now, the live action. Well, you know what I mean. You're recording the live action and the CGI scenes, and you're blending them together, and then you have to put in the sound effects and the music over the top of those CGI scenes as well. So it does extend the process quite a lot. And they said working with multiple teams, there's also going to be a lot of notes, things to change, or tasks for that department to do. So sometimes they'll just have a movie with like notes in it that say, which could just be title cards or something that say stabilize, warp effect, key out light stands. And then they send that off to the visual effects team. And now they know, okay, in this clip or in this scene, we need to stabilize it and stop it from shaking. We need to do the warp effect at a certain point, and we need to key out those light stands because they're distracting. And so then different notes like that will be given to each team. And each team will then take those notes and start working on it and doing what they need to do to get it how the production wants. Whatever that. Then there's one more thing by Wolf Crow, which he's going over the same process we've gone over, but he goes in a little more detail in some of the stuff. For storage and for backup, it could just be regular hard drives, or it could be SSDs or HDDs drives. HDD would be a hard drive. SSD is the what's the name of it? I know it, but I can't think of it right now. Somebody help me. What does SSD stand for?
Solid state drive.
Yay, solid state drive, which are faster and usually work better.
Solid? Solid?
Yeah, solid state drive.
Interesting.
And those are faster. They're like an improvement on HDD drives, hard drives, and they're faster and just an improved version. So, but they're more expensive. They're getting cheaper now. But yeah, so it could be on either one of those, or what's called RAID setups. RAID will be like 2 or more hard drives working together, where you're storing the information simultaneously on all of them at once, so that it's working faster and can access things faster. So you might have like a RAID setup with two SSDs, and it's recording the same information. They both have the same exact files. They're copies of each other. But that way, whenever you're putting it into the computer, it will grab half from one and half from the other. And that just improves the speed at which it can do all these things. And it also has a backup just in case the other one malfunctions or messes up or has an error. So usually, like for the bigger budgets, they'll use a lot of these RAID systems and stuff like this to make sure that it all is backed up, even in the system itself. When working on large budget, multi-team post-production processes, there's going to be storage is going to be centralized, which is pretty expensive. And that's so everybody can access what they need. He gave like a lot of these names. I don't know really what they are because this is kind of out of my field of expertise, but he said SAN, which is storage area network. So they'll get like a storage area network and they'll put the footage and everything in that after they back it up. And then that way everybody has access to it. So the visual effects team, if they need to grab that clip or if they need to grab that sound or whatever, they'll grab it. The sound of, I guess they wouldn't really grab the sound, but they would grab the footage. If they need to have some clip or something, if something gets messed up, they have access to grabbing it again and pulling it in. And the sound team has access to all the sound files and everything else everybody's doing, so they can import all the footage in so they can watch it and add their sound effects and whatever they need. That way it's not being sent and downloaded and uploaded and downloaded to different people or transferred between devices, because the more times you do that, the more chance you have for it to mess up. If you're constantly putting it onto an external hard drive and then giving it off to another person and they're plugging it into their computer and, you know, copying all the stuff to theirs. And then everybody doesn't have updated versions as well. So the bigger budget teams will also use that centralized location for all the stuff so that everybody has the up-to-date stuff as it's coming through. So you don't have to be sent it over and over again. Oh, you updated scene 1. Can you send it to me? Now they already have access to it because it's on that centralized network. And then it was the comment about how much they shoot, which we already talked about. Organizing the media with the metadata and all of that. Syncing, scrubbing, picture edit. He said many films will use Avid Media Composer or Final Cut Pro, but Avid Media Composer is usually used in like, it's more of an industry standard to use that one. And then the lower budget stuff, Adobe Premiere Pro, Final Cut, and what's the other one? I don't know. There's a few other ones. We'll talk about that later. I'll have it in the syllabus somewhere, but those are the main ones that are used for lower budget stuff. And Adobe Premiere Pro is starting to be used on actual other feature films as well. They just said that the most part, the standard is still Avid Media Composer. Said motion graphics will be added like titles, overlays, inlays, logos or indents, animation basics, stuff like that. And the industry standard for that would be something like After Effects. Those are like the basic graphics, not like visual effects, rotoscoping and all that. That would be done with something else on a bigger budget thing. After Effects would be used for more of the basic stuff that's not as intensive. But then they do the visual effects, which is rotoscoping, keying, 3D, animation, and compositing. Color grade. He said a high-end tool that like very high budget things will use is called Baselight, which I've never heard of. but I'm sure that's like one of the top tier ones you can get for color grading. But for mainstream, the main choice right now is DaVinci Resolve, which I've heard of. And then he said an important step is called conforming, which is transferring all the assets and media from one application to another and making sure it is as is. It doesn't change at all. So that's an important step, especially in like the really high budget stuff will have a specific person for very small seeming things, but that way everybody is responsible for everything and making sure that everything stays exactly the same. It's transferred correctly, that everything's being communicated as best as possible. And so whoever's in charge of doing that conforming needs to be sure that when they took it from one application to another, there's nothing missing, there's nothing different. Even one frame difference, it would change a lot of stuff and cause a lot of problems later on. So they need to make sure all the frames line up. There's, everything's synced the exact same way and all of that. So that's something called conforming. Then there's the finishing and mastering, which real-time finishing, minor edits, minor visual effects, final color grade, final motion graphics and titles. And he said this is more for like commercial stuff, but it's something called a hero box. And a hero box just means that it can kind of do everything in one. It doesn't do it the best. It's not like the best at every single thing, but it has the capabilities of doing it all at once and in real time. That way, when they're showing it to clients, and this is why it's used more for commercials and stuff like that, commercials or company projects and videos and things like that, because when you have those high value clients in there, their time is money for them, and you don't want to waste their time by something messing up or having to, oh, they wanted to change this, so let me just get into this application to do that. Now let me get into that application, which will take more time. So they use these things called a hero box to just have everything all in at once, and they can make those adjustments as necessary in real time while the client is talking to them if they need anything changed. Oh, I don't like that color thing, or that sound is too loud, or whatever the problem or issue is, or whatever their concern is, they can change it right when they're sitting there. Then he said that if you don't have like the money for that, because those systems are pretty expensive. Some of them are, one of them is called Autodesk Flame and Luster, Sam Quantel Rio, and SGO Mystica. Those are like the three main ones used apparently. He said if you don't have money for those, then you might be able to make like a sort of like a hero box using Adobe Premiere Pro, After Effects, and SpeedGrade, since they're all kind of in the same suite. That way you can have your own version of it, but you still will be using separate applications for it, but it won't take up as much time as using completely separate applications, like using DaVinci Resolve for color and After Effects for visual effects and Premiere Pro for picture edit. So, and this, like I said, this is all mainly for like when you have a client and they're there and they're watching and they're overviewing it, what you're doing, and they need changes as quickly as possible. For film, we're just going to do the mastering stage, like we already talked about. He said the most popular file formats for cinema are DPX, OpenEXR, and TIFF, which we'll learn, or TIFF, which we'll learn more about later on when we're talking about codecs and all that, file formats. But basically mastering is just rendering all the clips and audio into one sequence, one file, and it's going to be your highest resolution version of your project. You're going to make your master. This is where you start doing your deliverables, where, like we were talking about earlier, where it's like either a DCP or it's to DVD, Blu-ray, video on demand, all these other things. You're going to take your master and you're going to keep changing and adjusting a new version of it so that it can work on each of those devices the same and it looks good on everything. Instead of, because every time you change it and every time you re-export something, it's going to lower the quality, which is why you need your master to be the highest it can be. And it's also for future proofing it. Like old films, they're still making Blu-rays out of older films, and they're making, excuse me, they're making 4K Blu-ray now, where they're taking these older films and they're doing that. And that's because they future-proofed it, having that master file that's higher resolution than they need, so that they can make it look good even in today's technology. So that's why you'll see people with like 6K, 12K, whatever K cameras filming now. And that's because in the future, we might not be using 4K TVs anymore. We might start using 8K or 6K or 8K or 12K, or, it might just keep going up.
Some things you'll notice that are overrated, and we don't need to do that 'cause it's stupid.
I mean, to be fair, people would say the same about going from DVD to Blu-ray and then from Blu-ray to 4K Blu-ray.
No, I know. I'm just saying that I feel
People
like
said the same
8K
thing about going from a standard television to going to flat screen, and then from flat screen, they were like, that to UHD,
No,
what's the difference?
I know. I'm
But you
just
tell
saying
that there's a
some
difference.
things. I know, but I am just saying that some things we want the latest and greatest, and that's not always necessary. For example, yeah, Blu-ray came out, but then all these other people came out wanting to be the next Blu-ray, better than Blu-ray, blah 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 blah, and that didn't work out because that was unnecessary. And some did, but not all. And so I don't know. For me, 8K I feel is a little bit of an overkill, but it really depends on what the project is. I just feel like sometimes these TV shows want to use it as a gimmick, and they do it to a point where it's too much and it's distracting and you can see every little thing. So maybe we just haven't learned how to use it yet. Maybe it's not just used well enough.
Well, most people also don't have a device that shows 8K as well.
Well, yeah, but the ones that do, everyone complains that it's distracting and you can see way too much. And like you can see what's on a signpost and every little detail, and it takes you out of it and it makes things look more fake.
To be fair, everybody said the same thing about 4K TVs because 4K TVs had higher refresh rate, which made it look more like a soap opera effect. And so then the newer ones started making an effect where you could turn that off so that the refresh rate wasn't so high. I think it's called.
No,
refresh
exactly.
rate.
That's what I'm saying. I think
So it might
that
just be something like that.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. I think that maybe we just don't know how to use it yet. And that's why we're getting that.
Either way, that is why you will see people filming with those cameras now, because you're like, oh, why do you need that? It's so that you have, well, for one, it's so you have more room in edit. You have a bigger file than you need. If you're just trying to show it on 4K, then you don't need to have 6K, but you have extra pixels and extra room to reframe if needed, to push in a little bit, make like a fake dolly movement. And you have these extra abilities and capabilities because you shot at a higher resolution, but it is also very taxing on the equipment that you're using to edit. And it also is more expensive because it's more storage and everything like that. So that is stuff to keep in mind, but that is why you will hear people using those things, because they want to future-proof it in case we do go up to 6K or 8K, 5, 10, whatever amount of years from now. And then he said, like, going back to audio, they have their own way of doing things, and most of these we've already touched on. Once it goes to the initial people for audio, the sound department with their assistant, they'll clean the audio, sync it fully, ADR, sound effects, and all that. But then they usually combine tracks into what they call stems. And it'll be like a voice stem, which has all the voices of all the actors, all the dialogue. They'll have a music stem that has all the different kinds of music. Maybe they'll have vehicle sounds stem, which is like, all the vehicle sounds in the whole movie will be on those tracks. And within those tracks, it'll be on that stem, which is just a grouping of different tracks. He said the industry standard for sound is right now Avid Pro Tools. So right now the industry standard is Avid. I believe that's how it's pronounced, but they use the Media Composer for editing and Pro Tools for sound. I think these ones, which we'll talk about more later on in this semester, but these ones I believe are a subscription-based thing like Adobe. I don't think you buy them flat out, but we'll look into that later. Then he's talking about music composing and recording, which we've already said, but he also added that they'll still keep all the tracks separate when they send them into the sound mixer. Even though they've mixed it the way they like and they like the way all the music sounds together, they'll still keep it all separate when they send it to them because they want to make sure to give the sound mixer as much control as possible over the way everything sounds. If those drums are too loud, they're making too much noise and it's over, that's the only part that needs to be adjusted. Well, now they have that separate track where they can adjust the sound level of the drums a little bit down or something like that. So that way it works. Or if the director likes the music, but once he sees it with the sound mix and everything at once, he's like, oh, I don't really like how loud or how quiet this part is. And that way they can, or how much those trumpets are in. It doesn't really match the scene as much as I thought it did earlier with all the, without all the sound effects and everything else. And that way they can adjust it later. So the composer will separate the tracks, keep it separate, and not send them like a mix, not send them a master of their own. They'll send all of it separate still. Let me see if there's anything else. Oh, sound mixing, all the tracks of the stems or the stems so that it sounds good. And make sure that it goes well with the story, meets technical standards like Dolby, THX, surround sound, whatever it's needed for that production. They're going to make sure it sounds good on all of them. And they need to mix it so that it's going to sound good for each thing. So it's not just, oh, it sounds good on this one thing, we're good. You have to like see what it's going to be played on, see what it's going to sound like on this, see what it's going to sound like with this kind of thing. Dolby, like I said, Dolby Atmos, surround sound, if it 5.1, 7.1, whatever surround sound you're using, you need to make sure that it sounds good with all those things. And then like we said earlier, the director and producer sit with them and get it to the final mix, let them know if there's any changes or adjustments they want to have done or if it's good to go. Then the audio mix is mastered. As with the footage, different devices have different requirements and capabilities. So if you're mastering to Dolby Atmos, but also going to show it on YouTube, you're going to need to master it in have a different version of it for the YouTube version with a stereo mix, because that's usually what's used for the most part on YouTube. I think YouTube has updated. I'm not sure exactly how good it's gotten with that, but I know, like, you know, if you're mastering it for a theater, then you're going to have extra information in there or extra sound, or it's going to be different levels than you're going to need it for if you're just sending it to people to watch on their phones or watch on the computer. So just like with the mastering of the film itself, the sound has to be mastered differently so that it works with different things as well. And I'm sure THX and Dolby Atmos probably have their own standards and technical aspects that need to be looked at if you're trying to master for that, so that they meet those standards. Otherwise, they're not going to try to say this is good enough for Dolby Atmos, because they have a standard that they need to have for every single thing that has their whatever you call it, like that is allowed to use that name, that we have mastered it to Dolby Atmos. Well, no, you haven't. Dolby Atmos said it's not good enough. Dolby said it's not good enough for that standard. So they have to make sure to set the standard and get it up to that standard and make sure the requirements are met before it's allowed to say that it's mastered at that. And then another step he added that nobody else talked about was archiving. And archiving can be to hard drives, archival tape, etc. Some even archive back to film, since it can be maintained for a long time under the right conditions. He said it's kind of funny because now that you're shooting everything digitally and everything was edited digitally, sometimes these companies are now putting it back to film. They're scanning it and putting it to film and then keeping the film somewhere. And that's just for archiving it just in case anything happens in the future. A lot of people, especially lower budget, will just do hard drives. They'll put it on a hard drive and then keep that hard drive somewhere. But for the bigger budget stuff, they do both. And that way, if the hard drive doesn't work or doesn't scan again, they usually put it on multiple hard drives, I'm sure, but they did it on film because film, you can just, all it needs is light and then you can see what's on it. But for, hard drives and stuff, you need all these technology aspects to go with it to make it work. And that's everything. That was all the stuff. Does anyone have any questions or comments about any of that?
Nope.
All right. Then the last thing I wanted to say is, oh, sorry, go ahead, Mel.
I just have something to say about something you said early in. Just like, yes, you definitely don't want to move, the files after you've already put them into the project because it's going to be a pain. But sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes your computer, goes bust and then you have to do it on a new computer. And then those are inevitably going to be in a different directory. But just that like, it's not the end of the world if the files get moved, so long as you still have the exact files, you can redirect them is all. Like, for people who haven't edited, I don't even think, oh no, the files moved, I guess I better have to start a new project over again.
Right. Yeah, no, you can find it. You just need to know. That's why metadata is important. So you can kind of just search for it in your computer and find it very easily, or you can make sure that that's the right footage piece that you're looking for to make sure you're directing it the right way. But Mel's correct. Like, it's not the end. You just need to make sure you know where that footage is, which is also why organizing it before you put it into the project is important, so that you can say, this is footage, day one footage, scene one, take 3. And then, like, you're missing it. You chose take 3 to put it in the project, but it's missing now. Then you just go back and find it again and click on take 3, and there you go. So titling everything beforehand is very important too, to make sure you know what everything is, as well as that metadata that you put in, like the kind of like the background of the file, I would say.
Did you read what Raphael said?
No, what did he say?
He said, this whole time I thought this was about, wait, no, not that. I've been using Filmora. I think it's pretty useless in a lot of cases. Like, if you're traveling, you don't need 8K to watch a movie on your iPad, until, of course, the iPad in 1,000 and 12,000 comes out, and then everything will be high res by then. Today's unlikely subscription have pretty much went out.
Right, but I'm saying, like, it's the future proofing thing is useless now, but they would have said the same thing about, why are you shooting it in 4K resolution
I think he's
before
making
4K
this
TVs
argument.
were out, so it was like, before it was needed, it wasn't really usable. But now that that stuff is being used, they can still have that film be on this new format, and it still looks great, better than it did in the old format, because they have that master. And the closer we're getting, the further we're getting along in doing these things and getting more technologically advanced, the closer we'll get to those old masters. And that master file will be what we see at home, compared to, like, you could only see that master file, the best version of it, in a theater. Now, maybe whatever amount of years from now you want to say, we'll start seeing things, their master files will be what we see on our TV.
I just think he's making the same argument as I am, that it is more about like we're not there yet, but we might be one day. And right now it's just a gimmick that people are using. Kind of like 5G. We're not quite there yet, but it's
Right, but like they're
might
not
be.
releasing it. I mean, most things are shot at a higher resolution on purpose for those reasons. And it's not just for that, it's for the editing purpose. Some people will use it as, oh yeah, we shot it on 6K, but they release it, you know, on 4K. So it doesn't matter. And they don't really have that plan of making it in 6K anyway. They just want to say they shot in 6K. But for a practical use, it is actually used.
No, yeah, I know. I'm not saying like you're very defensive on this. I'm
I'm not
saying
defensive. I'm
that-
just trying to get my point across. So it doesn't sound like I'm. Plus, you keep over talking me, so I'm trying to get my.
Oh,
point.
you're right. Today I've been really bad at that. I'm sorry. I'm normally not this bad. The internet's also coming in and out, so I think that's also like I don't know when you're done. I'm
I was
sorry.
gonna say, yeah, like right now it feels kind of gimmicky, but I have been there where like I usually have felt that like in photo editing instead, where it's like you should take like a higher resolution so that you can work with it better.
Mhm.
But like right now, like the only place you can really watch like 6K or 4K or whatever is like on this like really techie brand new TVs and stuff like that, or in theater.
Yeah, that's true.
And then like new technology, like
Actually, I think
I'm just speculating,
theaters.
but
I think I saw somewhere that theaters use less than 4K. That they use 2K. I think. Let me check.
Older theaters, yeah, like they're still adapting to the 4K thing. It's not all theaters. But I am curious to see where they go with it. What were you saying, Raphael?
I'm really just speculating, but it's probably gonna be a while before like things kind of level out to the point of being like all across the board 4K or whatever.
Yeah, I do think that it's I do understand some companies' hesitancy because it is a huge change and you have to make a huge investment and change everything, you know. So of course, I would understand if a company was like, let's just wait it out and see if this thing is, you know,
Oof.
gonna stick.
And
Um,
then you have like another blockbuster, and then like they go under, and then like the newer company like that stuck out with the 4K stuff.
yeah,
Like
but it's hard because not everyone can afford it, you
Oh
know.
yeah,
Not-
2K. Just from this, I don't know if you know. It might not be 100% correct, but just from this, what I looked up, it says the majority of theaters in developed countries use 2K digital image projection, and that's 2048 by 1080p, and that whole area isn't even used except for in IMAX digital presentations. So they're not even using 4K in like theaters, at least not the majority of them at this moment. But you know, like I said, that's just from one thing. So don't quote me on that. I usually research more into like different research.
But like I
Make
said,
sure that
it's
people are all saying the same thing from different sources before I say anything.
no, yeah, but like I said, I think it's also because not every theater can afford it. There's a lot of independent theaters out there or smaller theaters, and so if I can understand a theater's hesitancy being like we want to invest in the 4K thing, but either we can't right now or we just want to make sure that it's worth the investment. I can understand the hesitation in that.
I don't know. I
sense.
disagree. I think it's more so, I think it's less because of that, more so because of like the whole theaters are kind of slow to move on to different technical aspects because people are so used to it. 24 frames per second is still used, even though we have a higher frame we can use. And I don't like the higher frames myself. I do like the way 24 frames looks. It's very film look, but that's because that's how we've seen films for all our
Yeah,
lives.
that's what I'm
So
saying.
seeing a
wanna
film at like 60 frames per second or something is very jarring and very weird and unnatural looking. And I don't like it. And I think that's why theaters still stay with 24 frames per second. And the same thing with the resolution thing. I think it's just because 2K is the general standard that there's, even if people want 4K or something like they're just slow to move on to the next thing because people are used to this. They might not like the look of 4K in a movie theater. They like the
and
way
that's
a movie
what
looks,
Raphael.
and movies look 2K right now. So
Yeah, and that's what I was telling Raphael. Like it's also about if this is gonna stick, if this is just a gimmick, how much of this is actually necessary.
I mean,
And
remember when 3D was, every single movie was 3D, and now like now it's only the action heavy ones, I feel like. So
yeah, because it was a gimmick. It was so stupid. Like the Spy Kids 3D were every single thing, and like, oh my gosh.
Is the meeting over?
It
no,
was just like,
not entirely. I was gonna say
we're
one last
ending it
thing.
now. Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna bring up something, but
I gotta get going soon too, so
All I was gonna say, guys, is just like for Thursday, we're gonna be talking about syncing footage. We're gonna be talking about the different ways. We're gonna delve a little deeper into that, how you do it, how time code works, time code generation, all that. We're gonna be talking about the different kinds of cameras there are for equipment. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. The different kind of cameras there are, and then like I think next week we'll talk more about what to look for in a camera when you're getting ready to buy one, because it's a lot more. And then we'll be talking about project files, delving a little deeper into that. We already sort of touched on that today, but we'll be talking a little more about that. Anything I missed or anything new. That'll all be Thursday. That's all I was gonna say.
awesome. Sounds great. Thanks, guys. I will
Yeah,
see you
thanks,
guys
guys. I'm
on
gonna stop the
Thursday.
recording right here.